Okay. Good morning and welcome to the Professional Qualifications Committee. I'm Charles Ward. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm the committee chair. Our vice chair, Malcolm Gladstone, is not with us yet, so I will be taking roll call. I'll start with myself, Charles Ward. I'm present. Brett Gladstone. Tian Feng.
Here.
Eric Lum.
Present.
Barry Williams.
Finally present, yes.
Well, welcome everyone. Okay, so we have a quorum, so we'll continue. This meeting is being webcast pursuant to the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-1-22 dated January 5th, 2022. This meeting will be held by teleconference with no physical location. Like to advise everyone, the committee of the voting requirements today. One, all motions and seconds will be repeated for the record, and two, votes on all motions will be taken by roll call. I'd like to stop for a moment and ask for public comments. David, are there any requests for public comments?
Bear with me just a moment, please.
Sure.
We are now open for public comment. Jesse, if you could please move the slide to the public comment slide. It should be the next one or two.
Is it here?
Bear with me just a moment. Slide 5. So we are taking public comments. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box, which should have appeared in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. For call-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand and send your request for comment to all participants. Let us take just a moment now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to close comments?
Yes. And I'd like to just take a moment to confirm my script has a, there may be a redundancy for public comments, but I've asked for public comments as a portion of my opening remarks, but the section C of today's agenda is asking for public comment on items not on the agenda. So if the public would like to address the committee at this time regarding items that are not on the agenda, members of the public are not required to identify themselves when providing comment to the committee. The committee today may not discuss or take action on any item raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to refer the item to the board's next strategic planning session or place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. So regardless, it sounds like we should now open back up for public comment again. I apologize for any redundancy there.
We're now taking public comments for items not on the agenda. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box, which should have appeared in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and send it to all participants. For call-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on request for comment in the order received. Let's take about 15 seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no requests for public comments, would you like to close the feature?
Yes, please. We'll now move on to item D. We'll review and accept make a motion to hopefully approve the meeting minutes from our March 26, 2021 meeting. I'd like to stop at this time and ask for public comment on those meetings minutes.
We are now open for public comment on item D. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box and send it to all participants. For call-in users, please raise your hand by dialing *3. Let us take just a few seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to close comments on this item?
Yes, please. May we have a motion to approve the minutes from March 26, 2021 meeting?
Sunny, I don't know if we have enough members attended the last meeting to vote.
I was just thinking about that. I was present.
Sunny, this is Laura, if you don't mind me adding to this. So members who were not at the meeting are able to vote on the minutes if they've reviewed them and are comfortable approving the minutes. If not, they can abstain. So if that's what members would prefer, we can just kind of take the vote and see what we get. And then I think we just need a majority of the members voting to approve.
Okay.
I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
I was present and I will second that motion. Shall we take a vote?
Yes.
I hold a second. Sunny, I contacted Brett. Brett is not even in the committee last year, is it?
I believe that's correct. I don't remember him being in this committee.
Okay. I think you can move on for voting.
Okay. We'll now vote to accept the minutes. Charles Ward, yes. Brett Gladstone. Tian Feng.
Yes.
Eric Lum.
Yes.
Barry Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes. We'll now move on to item E, which is the bulk of our discussion today. We'll discuss the 2022-2024 strategic plan, which was recently adopted by the board. We'll discuss the strategic plan objectives that were sent to our committee, which are listed on the agenda. I'll read them aloud now, and there's a couple that don't really require discussion today. One that requires a little bit of explanation, and one that probably will result in the bulk of most of our discussion today. One, amend existing regulations to revise and expand the types of degrees accepted for licensure to remove barriers to licensure. 2, collaborate with legal to implement AB 1010 and developing regulations and aligning committee findings to provide more consistency and make continuing education requirements more relevant to current licensing requirements. 3, communicate with staff to include climate resiliency as a priority subject matter for the California Supplementary Exam to protect consumers and licensees. 4, communicate to the public what the Professional Qualifications Committee has suggested to the board to promote the work the committee has done. I'll start with discussing, this is pretty straightforward. This is a communication between our committee and the board that's pretty straightforward. And the first one, amend existing regulations to revise and expand the types of degrees accepted for licensure to remove barriers to licensure. This is an ongoing conversation that the board is discussing. But the two bigger ones, and also go to number 3, which is communicate with staff to include climate resiliency as a priority subject matter for the California Supplementary Exam to protect consumers and licensees. This is definitely a discussion that's been going on with the board. The board has already communicated this, so I think this is more just sort of perfunctory to let our committee know that this is something that the board is doing and it has already done, and as it pertains and relates to the work of this committee. I think the biggest discussion that we have today is item number 2, which is to implement AB 1010. So maybe this is where we could have used a slide for AB 1010. I have it up on my, there was a link that was sent to all of you. I don't know if you all have the link and can pull that up, or maybe this is part of the PowerPoint, maybe? Probably not, right?
This is the moderator. If we don't have a PowerPoint slide for this, you can share your screen. I have added you to the co-host role. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a share button.
Oh, sure. Great. Can do that. Share Google Chrome.
Make sure you share the correct window.
Ready? Jesse Brew will stop sharing content as soon as you start sharing. Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen?
It shows up.
Okay, great. So here's AB 1010. You know what? I'll just read it. We have time. Existing law, the Architects Practice Act provides for the licensure and regulation of architects by the California Architects Board. Existing law requires a person licensed to practice architecture to complete as a condition of license renewal 5 hours of coursework regarding disability access requirements, and provides that the coursework shall be presented by trainers or educated with knowledge and expertise in these requirements. Existing law further requires the board to promulgate regulations to establish qualifications for courses and course providers by January 1st, 2023. This bill would additionally require a person licensed to practice architecture to complete as a condition of a license renewal occurring on or after January 1st, 2023, 5 hours of coursework regarding zero net carbon design, and would require the board to adopt regulations to establish qualifications for those courses and course providers by July the 1st, 2024. My first question here is for Laura. Am I understanding the timing right on this, that renewal occurring on or after January the 21st?
Yeah, you're right on the timing. It is kind of backwards, but the reason is that because the regulatory process is fairly lengthy, and the sponsor of the bill, which was AIA California, didn't want to delay implementation that long, so they wanted to at least start the requirement with that renewal cycle, and then have the board further define in regulation. So there's a possibility we might have the regulations ready, in time, before they're due.
Okay, so that was my question. Is there any possibility that we could indeed have our establish the qualifications for those courses and course providers by January the 1st, 2023, which is less than a year away now? Is that possible?
No, we won't have it in place by January 1, 2020.
Okay.
Probably we're aiming for before July 1, 2024, but the process takes, like, kind of best case scenario, 18 to 20 months.
Got it. Okay, so we'll move forward. We'll skip section 1A, and we'll move to B, 5 hours of coursework regarding zero net carbon design for all renewals occurring, similar language here, presented by trainers or educators with knowledge and expertise in these design requirements. The board shall adopt regulations. Okay, similar timeline here. And then this is the sort of perfunctory information that's similar to the ADA requirements, the audit. So what we're charged with is defining the parameters of zero net carbon design.
Yeah, Chair Wood, as a member, I feel this is implementation body and then soon become enforcement body. I feel it's absolutely necessary that this agency, from board member to staff, understands the definition and the scope that can be considered as zero net carbon design for purpose of accepting future educational credentials and also for the purpose of enforcement in the future to judge whether that particular 5 hours met the intent of this law. So I see a need of elaborated, detailed discussion. At least the members of this committee should have a consensus, and perhaps we can then reporting to the full board of our understanding. I fully aware of the staff will take the lead. We have attorneys here with us, but I think in essence, as an architect, that it is critical to understand that definition and scope of zero net carbon design. So that's first tier. Then the second tier is this committee has worked on a more comprehensive continuing education requirement in the past 3 years. And the staff has the finding that the committee presented to the full board if needed, because we have a few new members here today for this committee, and the staff can review the findings of our board's professional qualification committee's findings of how we're going to expand enhance our continuing education requirement. That finding was produced early last year.
Thanks, Tian.
Tian, this is Laura. So, and Sunny, so would you like that PowerPoint shared right now? Is that what, or?
If no one will jump in, I don't know if we have a public member here could maybe share the perspective of originator, which is AIA California. If not, I think it is helpful since the chair already read the key portion of the bill and also defined highlight the term of net zero carbon design. And if staff would share with our findings, maybe we can see how our finding might be interconnect or overlaps with this zero net carbon design. So Chair, if you don't mind, I think we can play that PowerPoint as well, just for the, in addition to, for the members of who are new to this committee.
Sure, I'm okay with that. Do we have that available and accessible?
Yeah.
It should be coming up now. And then let me see. I believe this is the correct one, right, Tian?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope Marcus can walk us through some of our findings.
Yeah.
Marcus, you're muted, I think.
You break the way, Marcus.
Sorry about that. It appears Brett Gladstone is on as an attendee, so if someone can move him up to a panelist.
Got it.
Okay, thanks. I can try to present this. So I'm not sure the direction you'd like me to go with the PowerPoint, but I mean, this was
highlights that you think that our finding, which is actually listed five bullet point.
John, this is
Um,
Laura. If I can, and Sunny, if I can just interject for a moment, I think for the benefit of the committee members that weren't on the committee last year. In the last strategic plan, the committee had an objective to look at developing a more comprehensive CE framework for licensees. So the committee did adopt something, which is what's in this PowerPoint, but the new strategic plan just has the objective of implementing AB 1010 with the zero net carbon design requirement. So I think where these two kind of overlap is just because zero net carbon design is not defined in statute, the board has the ability to define that and can take into consideration the work that the PQ committee did over the last few years to see if any of that can become part of the requirement. Am I summarizing that correctly, do you think, Tia?
Yeah. For example, I see, although has been the committee for years, maybe my view is more contained with my involvement, but we do have in, I don't know if this is fully, we have a more detailed, Marcus, this is the only slides you have, or you have a more detailed list?
So let me.
Yeah, after a few pages and each area, we start to list some. This is, for example, this is subject matters that the committee's finding directs to the full board looking into these aspects of practice and perhaps draw a continued educational requirement from these practice categories. And one of which, number 2, for example, sustainability and resiliency, and the Title 24 California Building Code may have connections or overlaps of net zero carbon design, and if that's the case, is the committee in a position that to interpret that how that broad or how would you call how flexible or the broad that the definition of net zero carbon design that may fits well or aligns well with some of our visions here, such as number 2 and number 3.
Hey,
And
Tian.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Marcus. So, Jesse, if you can advance it to category 2, it's the slide that specifically addresses zero net carbon design. That might be helpful at this point for what Tian is saying.
Yeah.
The bullet point there that talks about zero net carbon design, the strategies and architectural practice tools, carbon neutrality. So that's what you were looking at, Tian,
right.
with respect
That's
to this.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you only have a few slides, but this is what I meant to go to the categories. Yeah. So this is a more elaborated version by the committee about sustainability and resiliency, and some of the energy performance and the low carbon and environmental justice.
Yes. So go ahead, Laura.
Oh, sorry, this is Laura. I was just going to add, I think as I mentioned earlier, the staff, we've started working on the regulations just in draft form to get the process going. So maybe it'd be helpful to share kind of what we're looking at as the initial definition of zero net carbon design. And it would be helpful to get the committee members' kind of thoughts and perspective on whether that sounds appropriate. So if that's all right, I can it's pretty short. I can read it to you or display it if you need to, but talked about zero net carbon design requirement, meaning architectural designs of new construction and existing facilities that produces on-site or procures enough carbon-free renewable energy to meet building operations energy consumption annually.
I'm sorry, is there a screen that coincides with this?
No, but I could display it if you want me to. I have it just on my screen.
Yeah, it will be helpful. I think our members see this a full sub-bullet point of category 2 of the finding of a PQC. And we're good to see the staff's interpretation. Yeah, that's very helpful. If you make them
Can you see
bigger,
it there?
yeah, I cannot really read that.
I'd say that this definition is, you know, pretty much in line with the definition that's out there. And so I think our committee, what we need to discuss, and my reading into this is when we go back to our category 2, all of our categories in our category 2 on that slide sort of, in my opinion, would qualify as course directives and directions that would follow under this umbrella. So if we popped back to that category 2 page now after seeing this, so the first category is sustainability. So you know, there's two sides of net zero in construction, and one is the construction aspect, the part where the building is being constructed, and two, the second part is the life cycle of the building. And so the sustainability portion of that would fall under that first part of construction, and also just the sustainability of also the life cycle part, you know, the energy systems using less energy and being able to produce energy to accommodate those systems, and also procure, you know, require less procurement offsite. Resilience and adaptation, same thing. It falls under this. Carbon-free building design, obviously, that's a direct representation, and then climate justice as well is certainly related to this. So I think Tiana, and correct me if I'm wrong, where what I believe, and maybe what you believe as well, is that the class qualifications that would fulfill the requirements that this law is requiring is quite broad and in line with the conversations that have been ongoing at the board over the past several years.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification, since I'm relatively new to this conversation? Carbon-free is definitely an important aspect, but the other ones also seem pretty important to me as well. Sustainability, resilience, climate justice. Why was carbon net zero singled out for the 5 hours versus the other topics?
So I agree, and I also think that these are all part of this discussion, and they result in carbon-free building design. But to give you some background and some clarification on this, the AIA California pushed this legislation and this nomenclature through with a sponsor, and we ultimately supported it. It was hard. It got so far along that the board, it was difficult to sort of make any investment in terminology and nomenclature and sort of help with evolution. You know, just the process happened very quickly, and so now it has been passed. It's now come back to us, and we're charged with ultimately defining and implementing.
Okay. Because obviously, I think a lot of these topics have a lot of integration with each other. And I was thinking, instead of carbon net zero specifically, it could be a wider subject, you know, on the 5 hours of continuing education on sustainability in general, which could include net zero design or something else.
It's my belief that the 4 categories that you see on the screen, plus more, are ultimately what enable architects to create carbon-free building design. And I think that's what I'm advocating for, is a broader definition, which I think I hear you suggesting as well. And I think that that's what the larger board is wanting to hear from us, what we think the sort of guardrails for this carbon-free design building, education should be.
I'm sorry, this is Mitra. Am I, if I would like to make a comment and ask a question?
You are absolutely able to make a comment, but I think we have to wait until we do.
Yeah, that's my question. I would like to know if I'm considered a public.
100%, we want to hear from you.
Sure, thank you.
So
this is Marcus. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Marcus.
We have Mark Christensen in the audience. If anyone wants AIA, regarding
this sounds great, and I think this would be a good time if no one else on the committee would like to speak at this moment. We can certainly take a break and move directly to public comment.
Yeah, you can. Chair, if you could just let me explain to our new member, Eric, a little bit. Your depiction is all accurate. Just to be aware, very clear, the AB 1010 was generated and sponsored by AIA California. This comprehensive continuing education scope was generated by this committee from California Architects Board. So this is two different entities form these two different documents. So I hope that help you to understand why there's differences here. So I think we have, Sunny, I think we have enough public interest. At least Mitra will speak up. And I hope Mark will step in to share his perspective if we're open for public comments.
Sure. Let's, yes, so I'd like to ask the moderator to move us into accepting public comment.
We have opened for public comment on this. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box and send it to all participants. If you are a call-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order that comments are received. Let us take a moment now to see if we have a request for public comment.
Chairman Ward, this is Mark Christian. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, Mark.
Thank you. I was brought in, and I think I have my camera too. Thank you. Mark Christian with AIA California. Mr. Lum, Committee Member Lum, excuse me. The description of how AB 1010 came about is completely accurate. AIA California was the sponsoring entity of AB 1010. We had discussions with various committees of the California Architects Board, with members of the California Architects Board, about expanding or altering the course content. My board of directors wanted to focus on zero net carbon, not because they were opposed to any of the other subject matters that were recently up on the screen, but because they felt that the zero net carbon and decarbonizing the built environment was a priority issue, rising above the others. Whether one agrees with that or not, that was the opinion of my members on my board of directors, and so we focused on zero net carbon. That we did not want to confuse it or jeopardize it by expanding it to beyond the 5 hours and zero net carbon. But we are, of course, open to discussing in the future different content that can be included in any mandatory continuing education requirement. Chairman Ward, President Fang, I don't know if I answered the question or if there are any other questions.
I think it's very helpful to our new members to understand.
I know that helps. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Mitra, you can take advantage of this. Yeah.
Okay, sure. With regards to Mr. Lum issue, I agreed wholeheartedly with the idea, but of course the explanation that was made, it makes me think that why of course I understand the priority that was given to net zero carbon design, which at the same time sustainability, resiliency, and maybe climate justice can be included. But I'm wondering why AIA California didn't consider giving it a broader name, like sort of like, for instance, climate action, which brings, I understand, of course, I understand your position that you would like to give so much emphasis to net zero carbon design, but at the same time, I don't think it's appropriate to disregard or undermine the importance of the other three. So bringing all of them under climate action, I would have been, as an educator, would have been satisfying me more. This was my comment. But the question that I have, given this is going to be enforced in next year, my question is this going to affect the content of Supplemental Exam of California? And if so, to what extent?
I think I can answer that question as far as the supplemental exam is concerned. And if you go back to the item E, item number 3, item number 3. So it's
Sunny, I just want to make sure you will continue, but I want Laura and Mike, our attorney, that to be aware of where start a little more freer dialogue than very a very specific configuration control between the public comments and the board member reactions. If you permit us, I'd like this dialogue to continue. If you're not permitting us, let us know.
That's fine. You can continue as is.
Okay, great. Sunny, sorry. Go. I hope I not interrupt you too bad.
So in Mitra, in section E, the number 3 from our strategic plan objectives, communicate with staff to include climate resiliency as a priority subject matter for the California supplementary exam. So as we've discussed in the previous board meetings, we're not allowed to request or require certain items be included on the supplemental exam, but we're certainly allowed to communicate the importance of this. And the board has done this and stressed this and continues to do so even in this committee today. And so it's my understanding that staff and Laura and all the employees at the architects board that deal with the supplemental examination, that deal with the tests here, and these requests have resonated, and that this should reflect in the coming years in the supplemental exam. So I think that part has been taken care of. Is that correct, Laura?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we continue to communicate that.
Okay, great. So I think that part has been communicated. And then as far as, and again, this is an informal conversation about this, and let me know if we need to end public comment or continue in public comment to have this conversation. But I think your reactions are in alignment with my own reactions, and I believe Tian's as well, in that it's certainly my belief. And now if we switch back the PowerPoint to that category 2 from our previous meeting with those 4 items, it's category 2. It's my belief that these 4 categories on this screen 100% are what allow the discussion and the communication and the education to take place for a carbon-free building to exist. that all four of these categories are part of that conversation, and I would advocate that we include at least in general these topics as a starting point for our guardrails for the classes that you could take to fulfill the requirements of AB 1010.
Chair, would you allow me to make my remark before you close the public comments?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I also see our current AIA California president logged on as well. I appreciate her support. I may want to take advantage of her presence. I think, Mark, you perhaps have heard this committee really looking into option of broadening definition of net zero carbon design in hoping some of the strategic goals that the California Architects Board set for the climate-related subject matters to be incorporated into continuing education. So as a staff, would you willing to share your view how flexible the AIA California would be in terms of join us to define the scope and the definition of net zero carbon design? And also, if Rona, if you are, since you are current president, if you have your perspective, will be most helpful to this committee members if you want to take advantage of this public comment period.
Thank you, President Feng. Again, Mark Christian with AIA California. I am happy to defer to President Rona Rothenberg to answer that question. But I will just say we are always open to having a conversation on the requirements that impact the architectural profession, or that give the architectural profession the opportunity to better protect the health, safety, welfare of the public, such as through continuing education.
Thanks, Mark.
This is the moderator. During an open discussion, we have not had any requests for public comment. Would you wish it to remain open or close at this time?
We'll leave it open for a few more seconds, and then we'll close. We're getting close to the end of the meeting.
Sunny, this is Laura. If I could just interject while we're waiting. I think we have some kind of good, we've had some good commentary, and I think maybe as a next step, I'd suggest for the next committee meeting that staff can go back and kind of take this into account and provide some maybe more specific questions for the committee to consider at the next meeting, and then we can have maybe a little bit more in-depth discussion about what the requirement's going to look like.
Completely agree. That's great.
I'd like to, if I can, at least just go on record that I really agree with the comments that have come on in regarding to category 2. I think all 4 of these bullet points are very important. And I know that at least at Cal Poly, we are addressing all 4 of these. And so I just at least wanted to say that I agree with the comments so far.
Thanks, Barry.
Good. Looks like Rona unmute herself. Moderator, do we need to promote our public members in order for them to speak, or they can just speak up?
Public members can make a request for comment by typing the word comment into the Q&A box, or if they are call-in, they can dial *3 to raise their hand, and they can be called upon. They do not need to be promoted.
Okay, I'll move her back to attendee.
I think. Okay.
I think we've been in public for a while, so Tiana, if it's okay, I think we'll close public comment. Okay, so there's Our next item up on the agenda is adjournment. So before we end this meeting, is there any are there any other committee members that would like to? I think we've mostly given voice, and that will be recorded in the minutes. But if anybody would like to have any closing comments before we adjourn, now's the time.
I guess I just have a general comment and maybe a question for the members of AIA California. As an architect and as an AIA member and also a lead certified person, we now have all these continuing education requirements, which seem to be somewhat overlapping, and I'm wondering whoever these providers are or will be, will hopefully, instead of having separate, education session for each certification, if you will, if there's some thought in terms of how they combine together. So, for instance, just with California, if this goes through, we'll have the ADA requirement in addition to the zero net carbon requirement, which is 10 hours of continuing education. And the AIA, for instance, requires, I believe, 18 hours. So that's over half of the continuing education requirements for the AIA. So I'm wondering if there's any discussion or thought as to how all these interrelated certifications and continuing education requirements will work out.
That's good, Eric. That will be in our meeting minutes. We will share with AIA. They will certainly have opportunity come back, have dialogue with us. I just want to take this opportunity to thank our new members. And we have announced we restructured each of our committees. We appreciate very much on behalf of the full board that the new members willing to accept and devote their time and, most important, expertise. For example, both Eric and Barry are lifelong educators, and they are professors in the forefront of education. So we really appreciate that the perspective from people like you, and thank you for joining us. So just as a president of the board, I appreciate it, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Tian, and thanks for all the help in the formation of the new committees and all the work that you've done. I appreciate it. Okay, unless there's any other comment from our committee, indeed, thank you all for your service. It's much appreciated, and this is an important, great conversation, and I look forward to continuing it and to getting to know you all. If there's nothing else that anybody would like to add to the conversation, it's the last chance. We'll adjourn. So thank you all very much, and see you next time.
So right now it's 11:07. Shall we start?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's call this meeting to order. This is Mitra Kanani, and this is Communications Committee. I would like to moderator to start the roll call, please.
Well, so this is Laura. Ebony, would you like me to do the roll call?
Yes, please do. Or unless Ebony would like to do that.
You can go ahead, Laura.
Mitra Kanani?
Yes.
Ebony Lewis?
Here.
Nielsa Serrano?
This is the moderator. Just one moment. Nielsa needs to be brought up to the panelists. Okay, we should be ready for Nielsa.
Thank you.
Nielsa Serrano?
Yes.
And Denise Campos?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we have a quorum. I would like to reserve the chair's opening remarks for when we get to the item D and E. At this time, I would like to open it for public comments if there's anything related to items not on the agenda.
This is the moderator. We are now taking public comments for items not on the agenda. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box and send it to all participants. If you are a call-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will take comments in the order that they are received, and let us take just a few moments to see if we have a request for public comment.
So for the public, the committee may not discuss or act on any items raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to refer the item to the board's next strategic planning session and or place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. This is the government code section 11125 and 11125.7a.
At the moment, we do not have any requests for public comment. Do you wish to close the option?
Yes, please. Okay, so at this time, we would like to have, I would like to make a open for item D, which is discussion and possible action on March 26, 2021 committee meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Okay. Do we have all approved?
I second.
Okay.
Mitra, this is Laura. I can take the roll call for you.
Okay, please do.
Mitra Kanani?
Yes.
Ebony Lewis?
Yeah.
Nielsa Serrano?
Yes.
Denise Campos?
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are getting to item E, discussion and possible action on 2022-2024 strategic plan objectives, which I would like at this time to have a few moments to discuss about being a new board member. And I have had some studying to do related to obviously committee meetings and the previous strategic plan and the new strategic plan, of course. I realized that in the September 1st minutes of the committee, the original intent of the meeting was to meet in person to discuss strategic plan objectives, which I was not part of that committee yet, and provide recommendation for a revised outreach program and discussion and review and recommendation of the revised outreach. So practically the whole discussion of that meeting was revolving around recommendation for revised outreach. As a chair that have the honor and great pleasure to be assigned to this committee, I would like to start a more solidified plan of action for this committee, which it requires on the basis for coming up with a plan of action. I had to do some studying, which as an educator, drove me towards different direction that to gather my own, solidify my own thoughts. First, I started with the mission um, of the board, the California Architect Board, to protect consumers by establishing standards for professional qualification and ensuring competence through examination, setting practice standards, and enforcing the Practice Act. And based on that, we have the board has three agenda on its table always: regulation, licensing, and enforcement. Going into the goal 3, which is communications, I'm realizing that there are two items that are standing out, and that refers to two main words: connectivity and awareness. And so basically, I would like to I'm not sure if I'm trying to make it very, very quick and succinct as possible. That there is this book which is called Building Community, and it's a report that was conducted in 1996 as a special report for establishing a new future for architecture education and practice, and was funded by Carnegie Foundation, conducted by two scholars of the time, Ernest Boyer and Lee Mitgang. This was to establish a vision for the future of architecture, practice, and education in our country. I would like to read a passage for this rather than putting it on the slide. I'm going to read it to you. It says, membership in any profession, whether law, medicine, teaching, journalism, accounting, or architecture, entails not only the mastery of a body of knowledge and skills, but at its best, the honoring of a social contract to advance basic human values. Lawyers trained to serve clients competently, but as a profession, law must be judged in the end by how well its practitioners collectively promote the goal of a more just society. In the case of architecture, the larger purposes relate not only to building competently and fulfilling the wishes of clients, but to helping foster through design more wholesome neighborhoods, safer streets, more productive workplaces, a cleaner environment, and more cohesive communities. At the and it's very interesting that it says at the core of all profession then is a public trust. Indeed, any profession that drifts too far in its daily routines and priorities from that mandate risks, in the end, the loss of public confidence and support. So what I'm trying to bring to your attention is the task of, to my point of view, being charged for this responsibility. I really think that we need to take the mission of this committee much more seriously than what I gathered from the previous notes and minutes. That was going all over the places. To my point of view, this issue of public trust is the main responsibility of this committee. In the same, based on the research that these two scholars made about 25 years ago and still valid, many schools are still considering the mandates and the ideas, the comments that was brought by these two scholars, non-architect scholars, in this book, which has become the Bible for architecture education, is extremely important to establish the relationship, the connectivity that is coming based on the importance of establishing the trust, it should become as a requirement for the responsibility of this committee. They say in the new vision that they were prescribing, they are talking about the first essential goal, that they have come up with 6 essential goals, and this is the first one, and the 6th one is called an enriched mission. And this is very interesting that they call Enrichment Mission as connecting schools and the profession more effectively to the changing social context. And their 6th mission, the goal, they are talking about educators and practitioners should establish a more unified profession based on a new, more productive partnership between schools and the profession. So I don't think I said anything that was beyond what everybody have been thinking. But my point in this, my initial remarks here, is that we need to come up with a more structured layout for this committee as to what the committee should do, not just for this year, but in upcoming years, to solidify the thoughts that based on the two requirements, establishing connectivity and raising awareness, they have the plans have to function, and not just by individual board members' point of views or the entire committee. It has to be solidified and planned as of now for more future length of time, until things change in our world. So basically, we have to target who are our stakeholders, who are our targets for raising awareness and establishing connectivity. This is what I put together in my thoughts, and I'm sharing it with you. And after that, I'm going to go over our strategic plan items, which basically revolve around these issues of community of architects, practitioners, which I would like to pinpoint to them as practice group, which are members of AI and NCARB, and basically are collaterals in practice, and in education, which is NAB, National Council, National Architecture Accrediting Board, and ACSA, which is the unions of schools of architecture. So basically, these we have to have a solidified plan of action for how to approach them, how to establish this connectivity and relationship, and also allow for raising awareness as to who we are and what we are doing. To my point of view, California Architect Board, or the board per se, is the forum for establishing these connectivities between that is required between all the other collaterals of architecture. So the other targets have to be students and educators, and of course public. That establishes that image, that and public trust that we still have to work on it. We still have to work on it. As much as architects are considered in high standing in society, and they have a prestige, but the image needs to be worked on. And this is something that I personally have some thoughts about it. In general, going over what the discussion and possible action of 2022 and 2024 strategic plan objective have been is, if I have all of them. Okay, I have to. So I will read them. Possible discussion Number one is resume regular communication with American Institute of Architects, AIA, by attending joint meetings once a year to give a consistent message to architects, candidates, and consumers in California. Which personally I'm in San Diego. I'm selected as an ex officio by AIA to AIA local to sit and report and establish that connectivity with the California Architect Board. So this is something that we should all work on it to establish that relationship. Develop an outreach plan to educate licensees and candidates on information needed to acquire and maintain a license. And this outreach needs to be established in a very structured manner. Develop communication regarding the requirements of SB 9 and its impact on the profession. Personally, I have to confess that I didn't understand why this was brought up in the last meeting, and why this is part of the strategic plan for this committee. I have to be enlightened about this. I would appreciate if that, based on the history of discussion in the last meeting, to be informed about this. Develop an outreach plan for academic and private institutions to continuously provide students and educators with relevant information. This have been happening in the past when I was heavily involved in the particularly IPAL program at New School. However, I have to say that it requires more established visits, more frequent visits, and that allows the students to become more aware about the role and responsibility that they are accepting in becoming licensed architects. A lot of them, upon graduation, they do certain things that they're not supposed to do, and it comes from only their lack of knowledge. The more CAB is becoming involved with schools, it would be extremely helpful to the students and also educators. Publicize architects from diverse backgrounds to promote inclusion. Create social media posts educating licensees on violation to increase compliance within the profession. Survey higher education institutions for data on their architect student populations to understand their plans for creating space for U.S. resident students to mitigate a possible vacuum of professionals in the future, which I think we can seek help from NCARB. They have good number of their survey always address these issues as well. Provide information in multiple languages to increase accessibility to licensees and candidates. I currently don't know if there are any other languages translated materials in any other language at this time. So I would like at this time to open it to public comments, please.
Mitra, this is Laura. If I could just interject for a moment, I think because you've covered a lot of information already, you may want to have comments from the committee members to hear what their thoughts are before you open it to public comment.
Okay,
but just to keep in mind for the committee that these are all the strategic objectives that the board has adopted and are assigned to the committee. It's a lot for the committee to accomplish. So today's meeting would be a good opportunity to maybe prioritize which ones you want to work on. It doesn't necessarily, we won't have time to get into a detailed discussion of each of them. Thank you.
Sure.
I think I had my hand up. So I do feel like we need to continue with our outreach and engagement of the schools. I think that helps with the promotion of licensure, the pathway to licensure. In the past, we would I'll break up the list of schools and be a point of contact from the board. I don't believe by my experience that was the best approach. I do think that it was helpful when we rotated our meetings to different campuses. So then the students got to see us on campus. Some were able to have the opportunity to come and present to the board of what they were doing and projects they were doing. It was a nice balance for our meetings. I do know that it's challenging right now during the pandemic to see those students in person, but if we can continue to invite the schools to come to our meetings and present, whether it's in person or virtually, I think that could be a good way to continue the engagement through our meetings. So that's something that I would like to see as a priority for this year.
Great, Ebony. Can I just interject?
Please.
Is it possible move to the slides that actually is the item of the outreach to?
Yes, I'm glad you brought it. I would like to say something in response to this comment that I wholeheartedly agree with you. I really, and it was a thought that came to my mind when I was jotting down these notes that in fact rhymes with what you are mentioning. That with regards to host school, I personally hosted the CAP meetings a few times, and I gave even presentation when that was the time that we were working on the IPA program. However, it still is going to be, it would be, I think, a very interesting maybe gesture from CAP's part to bring a host school to the virtual meetings and allow for the faculty counselor for the internship opportunities to, or anyone from the school and the students to be in fact participant in these meetings and even comment. So this as much as it's depriving us from seeing each other closely, but it would, the virtual meetings is allowing for more opportunity for broader group of audience to participate. So if we invite the schools, students, and educators, and those who are involved in the practice aspect of the school to these meetings, it would be, I think, a valuable time for all of us.
Yeah, good.
Beneficial.
Good suggestion, Mitra, about the virtual meeting. Ebony, we want to come back to your comment. Hopefully today, you and the team will shape a policy or confirm a policy that the full board was looking at it. If you recall, this carpet-based, payroll go to every institute was overwhelmed, and we had started the concept of, can we each year only identify one representative educational institute at each level? For example, one school for UC system, one for Cal State, one for community college, and then we approach accordingly. We can always change that representative institute next year, but at least we can accomplish something at all level, including even high school if we think it's necessary to reach out. So can I challenge this committee today, after today, give the full board your recommendation that we can institutionalize that each year we go approach our communication with educational institute by representation based of that school column categories or something that is that something this committee will be interested to support? If you do you have a recommendations? Which school, for example, should we start with UCLA or UC Berkeley as a UC system, and should we pick, Diablo Valley College as a community college system? So anyway, I challenge the committee to take action on this.
Mitra, this is
May
Laura. If I could just interject for a
ask
second.
that, do we have to take a vote, or I am wholeheartedly for it?
I think Mitra, I know this is the first committee chair you're running at the board. If you see the people's hand raised, you can benefit from their remark. So
Denise has her hand raised.
I've had my hand up. Hi, nice to virtually meet you, Mitra, and welcome to the committee. So I've been on the communications committee for several years now, as well as Ebony and Nilsa. And just to provide a little context and background, this committee would only meet once a year. So there was very little action taking place. And when we look at the mission of the California Architects Board, it's to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and also to serve as a regulatory licensing agency. So now this is new, where in the strategic plan for the coming year, we have very specific instruction and direction from the board of steps to take. And I need more information and context to all of this. As I look down the list, starting with like number 1, resuming communication with AIA, who I think maybe Tian or anyone else who's on the board, or Laura, if you could provide more context to what that means, as far as like, is it someone from this committee and so forth? And then so I need context for each of the recommendations. And then secondly, I wanted to ask how regularly this committee will be meeting, because I want to wrap my mind around how realistic it is to go down this list of items, because if we're going to meet once a year, it's a hard sell. So,
thank you, Denise, for prompting me. I should clarify that the restructured committees are smaller in number, but wider in representation, and minimum meeting will be 2, but could be more as needed per year. And the charges listed for each committee are to be carried out in the next 3 years in same cycle of a strategic plan. So it looks like you have a 6 or 7, but if you can take care of 1 or 2 or 3 each year, you will just do well. In context of communication with AIA, this is perhaps the best illustration was the last session, that the AIA promotes a bill, that the AB 1010, if we had a more close coordination, and our vision and AIA vision maybe can be more holistically addressed as a part of bill. So we see these kind of communication-based enhancement will lead to better outcome that to protect our consumers and also licensees. So that is the essence of why we need more close contact. So we like, seeking advice from your committee. How often that should be? Is once a year good? And if we do this, who would the committee think should attending that meeting? Of course, we have to reach out to AI California, and what will be the topic, for example. So anyway, that hope gives some background for this new restructured committee.
I definitely. I would like, if possible, with the team committee of us right now. I think we lost one of our members. Did we lose Rana? Definitely, and she resigned. So it's the remaining is 4 of us. Are we going to have another person added, Tian?
We will look into that. Most likely, we will find a substitute. Yes, the answer is yes.
So yeah, we definitely need one more. That would be helpful. And I would like to have a meeting with our team together, maybe before the next board meeting, if it's possible.
That Laura will answer, but the meeting are pre-scheduled need ample time for notify public, you can always call your committee members individually if you like to speak.
Yeah, that I'm saying informally. It doesn't have to be.
Okay. So coming,
Laura, if I could just interject real quick, Tiana, I'm sorry. So, Mitra, I'm not sure what you meant by team, but if you want the committee to meet before the next board meeting, that can't happen because this is the scheduled meeting before the board meeting. You can have, if you have more than 2 members meet, it is a public meeting and we need to follow the notice requirements. So that is, sort of the time-consuming process of noticing a public meeting. So we can do follow-up with committee members. It can come from staff in between scheduled meetings, if that's what you're suggesting. But we won't have time to schedule another meeting before the February 18th board meeting.
Okay, so I have to talk about understanding these procedures because I personally think if we want to come up with a plan of action for this year, we need to meet as a team and discuss about our plan of action and establish our plan of action.
Okay.
So in that regard, I personally prefer in the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks to have another meeting.
Mitra, normally the topic like this, again, I fully understand you are new to the committee and new to the board. Your conversation with the staff. So
yes.
Another way, generally don't use this public meeting to discuss our business operations.
Yeah.
But anyway, with that said, Denise, I only mentioned about charge number 1. Do you want me quickly provide the context for all 6 charges?
Sure, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, we'll do a quick one. Next one. Laura, help me if I don't cover, or you can jump in. That is the subject you're familiar with, Denise. Why are you on the board? We already start talking about that. I think we can move on. And that's the one that Ebony just addressed. And SB 9 is ADU, in other words, the encouraging more housings by allow single family zone for adding additional units. Perhaps every California familiar with that law. And some of our board members' concerns that is that blurred boundaries of current architects performing their service or the consumers looking for architects. There's any clarification we need to make to public? There may be, maybe not, but I think it's an appropriate topic for this committee to look into it and presenting your finding to the full board. Okay, next one. Develop outreach and academic provide institute. With Albany is actually on this item. So what is the number 2? Number 2 is outreach to allied professional organizations,
yes.
I think.
Yes.
Oh, educating licensees. That's a long term. Sorry, let's go back to I skipped. Go back to number 2. Denise, this is also something we talk about while you're on the board is all the licensing laws, continuing educations, and lessons learned. We like to make them more friendly materials available on our website or other forms, so our licensees and the public can log on, look at a piece of video or some kind of PowerPoint, have themselves educated. And I think we start this on the landscape technical committee. They produced the 2 videos, if you remember. We can emulating that, and we just want to make sure this group will, watch that element will happen in the next 3 years, if not sooner. Okay, let's go to number 5. Any questions? Denise, stop me, and I can go further. Publicize us architects from diverse background to promote inclusion. That is more responsive to, inclusion and diversity and equity. All these the social justice issues that we want to be responsive about, and we're talking about during the strategic session. can we even highlight, use our medias, use our power of communication to showcase, individuals with different background that are making contribution to architecture professions and in protecting our consumers, and we think we can do that. For example, last year we showed one of the architect. What is it? All of a sudden the name anyway, move on. Next one. And create social media posting education licensing violations, increase compliance and within the profession. So this is something the board will talk about. Can we be more proactive on the prevention side? In addition to, we have done successful work in enforcement side. So we want the education committee to look at it. Can we utilize modern social medias and get the message across so more and more people and licensees will perform professionally, avoid getting to violation situation? Yeah, I think one more, that's it. Yeah. Survey higher education. This is also one or two members interested. Perhaps you're familiar with this discussion. Why you're on the board is, we welcome international students and at all level of the institute, but by welcoming them and by maybe we don't have additional resource, if for example for the US institutions, is that any concerns that we have enough resource building architects that will actually stay and serve the state. So that's another concern from some of the board members. And we also feel this is a more communication-based effort. And that is, again, about equity and diversity. Is to the extent we can, should we look into more cultural, more language type of facilitations, either on our social medias or even in our official correspondence with licensees by utilizing more languages.
If I can add, I think Denise, you raised a good point. It's a lot for the committee to deal with.
I have a hard time hearing you, Laura.
Is that better? So
Yes.
I'm sorry. So it is, as Denise pointed out, it's a lot of objectives for the committee to deal with. So really today it's just helpful, I think, if the committee members can give some thoughts on which ones they would like to kind of tackle first. Staff will kind of then develop a plan in terms of the work that needs to be done to implement them. And so at the next meeting, the committee can dive into the ones that they wants to work on, sooner in the next year.
Hi, Laura. I was thinking that some of these plan objectives are pretty clear where staff can take a leadership role.
Right.
So as I go down the list, I think one, staff can set up a virtual meeting between interested board members and AIA and create an agenda of items that want to be discussed. Two, staff can create an outreach plan to educate licensees and candidates that can be brought back to the board or to the committee, so we can say yay or nay or offer feedback and suggestion. Three, staff can prepare a communication plan recording the requirements of SB 9, and again, if it's timely, bring it back to the committee for feedback. Four, developing an outreach plan. I think that's something that the committee can tackle and strategize on what we feel would be the most effective thing to do. Five, publicizing architects from diverse backgrounds. I'm open to what other committee members think, because that is something that staff can do via social media or the newsletter, or maybe the committee has some recommendations as well. Six, that one's pretty clear, creating social media posts. We already have an active social media. I've been appreciating the monthly updates on the communications end from Jane. So that's already something that's happening, but it's just kind of like additional information that's of interest to people. Seven, I think, is something that the committee can discuss later. And eight, providing informational languages is like something that can be done as well.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Good thought. Okay. I personally don't have anything unless. Are we open to public right now? Not. I don't think so.
We have not yet opened for public comments.
Okay.
Yeah, Mitra, just maybe give a few seconds. I don't know if any committee members, do we have Nyota here as well? Or if
Nielsa is here. She had to step away for a moment, so you
oh, okay.
have to open for public comment.
We can open for public comment.
Okay.
We are now open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box, which should have appeared in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and send your comment to all participants. If you are a call-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will take people in the order that requests for comment are received, and we have a raised hand from Rona. Hold on just one moment, and we will send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh,
Can you speak louder?
yes, I'm going to turn up the volume, and I apologize for not being able to unmute before. So thank you for having me and for the years that I served on your committee. As the AIA California 2022 president, I'm pleased to work with your committee in whatever is the appropriate forum to collaborate across our strategic goals, which actually overlap. And so, in particular, Chairman Fang had told me that we would be collaborating formally. And so, as an action, we look forward to hearing from a member of the CAB staff. Can certainly contact our Director of Government Relations, Mark Christian, and then we will set up a meeting which is appropriate to collaborate across our various strategic goals, which I think are our goals of licensure, of equity, diversity, and inclusion, training, and so forth, that we have a number of strategic goals which are aligned and coincident, and you have our support, and we look forward to doing that in a regular and deliberate way. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rona. I'm looking forward to be able to collaborate with you on this issue.
And if I can add, Rona, thank you so much for logging on and for all of your years of participation. We look forward to continuing the conversation, and congratulations to you in your new role.
It was my privilege. Thank you.
Do we have any more comments?
Mark Christensen said Rona has it covered, and that is it for our request for public comment at the moment. Would you like to remain open for a moment longer, or would you like to close comments?
Maybe a few seconds more, please.
Let's give it another 15 seconds.
Sure. I think we can close the public comments. We're moving to adjourn. I'm glad Rona mentioned about communication, as I have a slide that I received a file yesterday from NCARB that I selected that slide to show in this meeting with that shows their emphasis on communication as well. And as you see, in fact, in their they had worked on their strategic plan, and their awareness in the architecture community is one of their priorities, which extremely is important that we collaborate with them. A lot of important statistics is that we can obtain from them as well. So future focus on research and development, is basically have to do with 3 items of program and service excellence, awareness in the architecture community, and stakeholder systems, tools, and resources that ultimately is bringing them to the development that they are planning for. And with that said, I would like to bring us to adjournment if there's no other.
I just want
okay, please.
say my words of appreciation for the new committee members to sign on, for the members served before, bring your experience back, for public members who's no longer part of the organization, still devote their time like like Denise. And many thanks to Rona. She has other commitment, otherwise she will even perform more regular roles with us. But Rona, good luck, and you have lots of responsibility. And thank you for joining this meeting. And we look forward to work with AIA at more regular base. So that's my remark, Mitra. Going back to you.
Much. And I'm looking forward to working with the committee team. I was looking forward to have Rona on this committee as well. It could have been ideal for us, but we understand she has a lot on her plate. I'm looking forward to working closely with all the committee members and getting to know them more, obviously, to learn from their experiences as well. Thank you very much. It's a great honor and pleasure that I appreciate Tian charged me for. Thank you very much.
Have a good one. Bye.
So Laura, this is Ron. Can we confirm, I believe that if I heard correctly, myself, Robert, and Bob Chase are here, so we should have a quorum, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, so you can start if you'd like, or if you want to wait for the others, but you're able to start now.
Okay, if there's no objection by the committee members, I suggest we give them another few minutes. I want to be respectful of your time.
We can wait a couple minutes, sure.
I'm apologizing. I guess I didn't start my video, so let me do that.
Hi, Ron. I just want listening in for a few minutes, then I will sign off for my other meeting.
Okay, thank you, Tian. And so I would suggest that we start at 5 minutes after the hour, if that everybody's okay with that.
Sounds good over here.
Laura, procedurally is permitted if a board member or committee member briefly introduce themselves with 1 or 2 sentences?
Yeah, I actually have that on my opening remarks.
Oh, good. Great.
Okay, everyone. We've now reached 5 minutes after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to first start by asking Board Member Pierman to basically do the roll call.
All right. Ronald Jones,
Present.
Robert Pearman, present. Sylvia Kwan, Stephen Winkle, Bob Chase.
Here.
You do have a quorum, sir.
Thank you.
I think
Laura.
I'm sorry, this is Laura. Yeah, I think Sylvia says she's on. I'm going to check the list of attendees. Yeah, if she could get promoted, she just joined. Thank you.
We'll recognize her attendance in our roll call if that's appropriate. Laura, can you confirm whether or not we have to acknowledge the governor's executive order for digital or remote calls meetings?
I don't think you do. We read it at the first meeting, so we've been in continuum.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So
I think
Sylvia is a participant, so I just acknowledge her attendance.
Thank you very much. So I think I first want to acknowledge the services of our past committee members who are no longer serving in the way of Cheryl DeMarco, Robert Ho, and Sharon Voigt. I want to acknowledge their service and express our appreciations for their time and their commitment. I'd like to also recognize our newest members of the committee. First, I'd like to recognize Robert Chase. I believe Robert basically has served as a consultant to the Arctics Board for the past few years. I'm going to ask Robert to basically yield the floor to him for a simple introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Bob Chase, licensed since 1980 in California, served in private practice until 2005, at which time I was lured out of private practice and became chief building official for the city of Sacramento. In another jurisdiction after that, in 2012, I was appointed by Governor Brown as the deputy state architect. Retired from CalPERS in that role in 2016 or 17, and then became architect consultant with the board shortly after that. So,
well, welcome. I can't say enough. I was excited when Chairman Tien mentioned that you were going to serve. I took the liberty of reviewing your background. It's impressive. I think you will provide tremendous value to the committee, and thank you very much for your participation. I also want to recognize Board Member Pierman for his leadership as the former chair of this committee. I served under his leadership for the last 2 years. Again, I want to acknowledge him and his contribution over the last few years. Board Member Pierman, do you have any comments you'd like to share?
No, thank you very much, and look forward to our new and hopefully streamlined and improved committee this year.
Thank you very much. I'm excited about what we have before us, and I'm excited by the makeup of the committee. I went through the strategic plan pretty thoroughly. I reviewed both historical data that was provided to us over the last 2 years, and with the inclusion of members Winkle and Chase, I'm excited about what we can accomplish in the next coming years with staff. I will now basically ask for open for public comment, if that's the appropriate thing to do at this point, Laura, for items that are not on the agenda.
Sure. Yeah, that would be a good time. And then, yeah.
We are now open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box, which should have appeared in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and send your comment to all participants. For call-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. Let us take just a moment to see if we receive a request for public comment. Seeing no requests for public comment, would you like to close the feature?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. So at this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to receive and approve the minutes of our November 5th meeting. Assuming that everyone has gotten it, we'll give you a few minutes if you hadn't had a chance to read through it.
I so move.
Been moved by Robert Pierman. Is there a second?
Ron, this is Laura. I'll just interject. This came up in one of the prior meetings. So I know some of the committee members weren't on the committee when this meeting occurred. So it's up to members who weren't at that meeting to determine if, after reviewing the minutes, if they feel comfortable approving them, they can, or they can abstain from the vote.
And I believe that the only person here that was on the previous committee would be Sylvia, and I suspect that she would be an appropriate person to second the motion if she's still online. And maybe she's muted or is having technology challenges like I was earlier.
She is muted. I'm in.
That's unusual.
Oh, very funny. I'll second. I will second the motion.
Okay.
It's been moved and properly second. So I'll call for the question. Mr. Pierman, can you take roll call?
Certainly. Bob Chase?
I'll abstain since I was not there unless we're going to need a vote to carry it.
Sure. Sylvia Kwan?
Yes.
Ronald Jones?
Yes.
Robert Pierman, aye. So it passes 3-1 abstention.
Very much. So, committee members, as I mentioned earlier, I'm excited about where we are in this process. I'm just going to read something because I wanted to basically at least establish a foundation by which I would basically lead this effort in the next few years. And I basically wanted to understand and define for myself what our task was and as it pertains to consumer protection. And this consumer protection is suggested is the practice of safeguarding buyers of goods and services and the public against unfair practices in the marketplace. That's the overarching task that we have is consumer protection. And I think that in reviewing the strategic plan, I think it's narrowed our focus for the next 2 years, I believe, in a very deliberate way. I actually saw it in 3 separate categories. I'm going to walk through these if you would indulge me. But I saw it in 3 different ways. One is basically understanding the enforcement mechanisms that we have in place. The second is basically educating both practitioners and consumers about roles and responsibilities as well as expectations. And lastly was a monitoring exercise, both monitoring our efforts and the efforts of non-licensed practitioners or not non-licensed individuals and how they promote themselves. And so if we could, as we walk through these objectives, I think it's really important. And I was hoping specifically to lean on members Winkle and Chase in their capacity, historical capacity, to provide us guidance on these particular subjects. So the first one basically talks about detailing this, providing more detail on how decisions are made relative to enforcement and in cases that the executive director is reporting back to the board and how we inform the consumers of those standards. And then if we can go to the next one. The next one is basically speaks to the development of a narrative and case studies for common violations. This one is extremely important. In my review of the documentations, there are 2 things that stood out to me. One was that most of the violations were charged against residential designers, so small design practitioners, as opposed to large corporate practitioners who are protected by the veil of their employer's corporate structure. And then the second was basically unlicensed professionals. I believe that in my reading, about 25% of all violations are lodged against unlicensed participants. And so I think that, again, that's an important one to understand. Next one, please. The next one is basically educating both practitioners and consumers about responsibilities and what their responsibilities and understanding the roles of practitioners. This was uniquely important to me. I've often asked the question whether or not those who are in violation of services and professional practices are in violation because of ignorance or negligence. And so part of what I want to better understand in this educational platform is a commitment to basically making sure that those people, that our deterrent isn't fines, but our deterrent is really an education. If we find that we're not reducing the number of violations just because we are basically fining people, that's at least in my opinion, that shouldn't be our overarching strategy. Our overarching strategy should be to ensure that those who are in violation because of neglect, of malfeasance, and not necessarily because of ignorance. Next, please. And this is the second one. The other one is that I come under the structure of education, where we basically take it upon ourselves to make sure that that consumers understand where the connections are between the practitioner and services. We talked a lot about the fact that oftentimes architects work through developers, they work through contractors, they work through design build entities. And what is the relationship between the consumer and the architect in those structures? And to make sure that both the practitioner and the consumer understands that. Next. And then the threshold for fines in some ways are tied to the violations themselves. That was under point 1, where we talked about the enforcement and how decisions are made. I believe that the violations in the fines should be tied. There should be some correlation or some relationship between the two. And lastly is basically the monitoring exercise. We talked about the fact that if a little less than a third of the violations are unlicensed individuals, the question ultimately is that how do we monitor that? And reading through the materials from last year's minutes, it was clear to me that there's not a lot of teeth in our efforts. Is that oftentimes those unlicensed professionals or unlicensed individuals fail to basically pay the fines because there's really no recourse that we have, because 1, it's expensive, and 2, is the process is basically demanding. So those are the overarching strategies that I see. I would encourage us, if the committee would indulge me, to narrow our efforts so that we're not basically looking at 6 points, but maybe just 3, and trying to combine those educational elements, the enforcement elements, and then the monitoring elements. I did ask staff to evaluate which of these 6 principal objectives or goals would be the easiest to accomplish. So I'll open the floor for discussion and your thoughts.
Ron, thank you for the great overview to the committee. And Bob, thank you for joining us. Bob Chase, it was wonderful, your assets to us. I just want to say great appreciation for everyone continue to serve and coming on to serve. By the way, Ron, this is the charges are you're having 3 years to deliver them. So take your time. And with that said, thank you again. I'm log off and I have to join my other meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you, John.
So Ron, were you asking the staff to respond first to what you had asked them, or what?
Only because what I mentioned to Laura is that what I like to make sure that we are establishing achievable goals. And for me, I love to basically look back on this and know that we've put measures in place that starts to move in one direction or another. So I just don't want it to be, a lot of debate and no progress. And so it's easier for me it's from my perspective, it's always easier to address the low-hanging fruit. And so I had asked staff to basically give us feedback on where they think we could best serve or best work.
Okay, I can jump in if you'd like. I think, so the first objective, provide more detail on decisions in the Inspector Officer report. I think that one is fairly easy. And I think unless there are specific comments from the members now, I think staff can kind of take this one, put information into the next report, and then receive feedback from the board members to see if that's what you're looking for. But I think this is a fairly easy one to accomplish. And then number 2, I think is probably along those lines, but it's going to maybe take a little bit more effort. We can see what type of information we can pull together from our enforcement cases and turn that into kind of an educational narrative. Probably I would say number 2 and number 3. I'm sorry. So that's number 2. So then number 3 on better educating practitioners, that one I think is pretty straightforward in terms of, I think staff can take this and see what information we can provide in the renewal process to educate licensees as to more of what the requirements are, maybe changes in the law. So if the committee members have feedback as to kind of maybe the topics that could be included, but otherwise I think staff can take this one and work on development of it. And then I think number 4, we could use some thoughts from the committee as to what you would like us to do with this one. And also for number 5, I think we need maybe a little bit of feedback as to what the committee is looking for in terms of the information you want on the fine structure and what it maybe specifically where you'd like this one to go. And then number 6 on monitoring social media activity, I think that is one staff can do, but maybe it would be helpful to have some idea of kind of maybe the scope of what the committee is looking for this objective. Is that helpful?
I think so. And so I'll open it up to the committee. And then I do want to go back and address these one by one to see what's in place currently that we can basically expand on. So I'll ask other committee members for comments. And we can take them one by one to the committee. We can take them one by one if you like, if that's easier. So I would suggest that we just do it that way, and we can aggregate them later. But let's kind of go one by one. Are there comments on the decision-making process for cases?
Well, I know we get a board summary with some detail on some of the enforcement actions. So I would think there's already some material that's readily available for the EO to prepare that in something that could be more clearly discussed in our meetings and also somehow on the website or something like that. I think, yeah, that raw material I think is there. It's just maybe a way of highlighting it in a way that's informative and educational and kind of focuses on the key things that practitioners have to avoid and that consumers should be aware of.
And Bob, from your experience, has the process been really consistent in terms of violations and application of the investigation and enforcement? Has it been really consistent in a way that can be easily narrated or defined?
Yes, I think it has been. You know, my 5 years at the board, I believe the decisions have been consistent, the fines and the outcome, so of the violations. Yeah, I think we have been very consistent in that.
Okay.
I think by
Any
and
other
large that's true, but I think that this bullet point would help us be more clear about that, and everybody can look at and see if indeed we are, or if there's some areas of variation and why.
Any other comments, Sylvia, or anyone else?
This is Laura. If I could just add, Sylvia is, she had to rejoin the meeting, so she was asking to be it again, although I don't see her in the list of attendees or participants. Maybe if the moderator could find her. Thank you.
So Sylvia, I think that from my perspective, is this a process question in terms of how decisions are reached, and is that what this objective is trying to accomplish, is for us to better understand the process? And Laura, this is for both the Robert and Sylvia. I'm trying to make sure that I really understand the objective here, because this.
Yeah, what I recall of this objective was that, you know, when the board meets in closed session to discuss cases, I think well, I guess not really related to closed session, but just that the board would like more information on the types of cases and complaints that come to the board, particularly because, some closed without any action. So just getting a little bit better perspective on kind of the totality of cases and decisions that the board staff take action on because of the role that staff has before it comes to board members.
And I think that if we could provide a process narrative to that as well, that would be really helpful. I suspect that a lot of what we do is subjective. And the question is there a gap between subjectivity and objectivity that we can narrow?
Well, I can, I've been through a lot of these sessions, the closed sessions where we talk about that particular issue, and we don't always agree with the recommendations, but I would say that 90% of the time we come around to understanding what the rationale was. A lot of it actually has to do with the licensee itself, himself or herself, as to how they feel about their case. And I would say that surprisingly, I would say most of them don't fight it. They realize, either because they finally realize that what they did was was not correct. And so most of them actually accept the verdict and accept the punishment and the fine without too much fight. There have been a few that fight back. And so I think that's how I've been looking at it, is that if the person who made the error acknowledges that error, then we should just accept what they accept. And, we're not trying to work on their behalf. We're just trying to understand the situation.
And I think that the thing that my takeaway is that would be to better understand, as we talked about again, the infraction and the penalty. Is the penalty for a parking violation the same as a moving violation? And so better understanding those standards, I think, would be helpful as well. And so I think part of it is to understand both the process and the application, I think, is what I leave here with. Because I think I agree with Sylvia, is that oftentimes staff's reports and certainly the findings are pretty clear. What's not clear to me is, at least I'll say, it's not always clear to me whether or not the violation is just a blatant disregard of the requirements or the lack of understanding of the requirements. And that's kind of what I'd like to basically figure that out as well.
Well, what's interesting to me is that when we get these cases in front of us, more often than not, it is the client that reports them. Okay. There's 0% of self-reporting and mostly clients complaining. Now, there are several ways that clients can get their day in court, colloquially. One is they could sue them through a civil case. They can obviously go to small claims if it's a smaller amount, but when we get the cases, they've gone through, they go, okay, who regulates architects and their practice? And they come to the architects board, and that's when Laura reviews it, and et cetera, et cetera. We know all that. But because we have to be very careful, because when the client is the one that reports this situation and their dissatisfaction with the performance of the architect, we have to look at it really carefully, because sometimes there's a he said, she said dynamic. And I'm sure, Laura, you work through all that. I mean, you know that these are legitimate concerns, because there are dates that certain things are supposed to happen and they do not. There are contracts that are supposed to be signed and maybe they're not. And there are promises made in writing by the architect and they're not fulfilled. And that's most of the time, I don't know, Laura, if you agree, or Bob, or Robert, but seems to me a lot of the times it's just the architect not meeting the contractual obligations in their contract, and then the owner has already paid them usually, and they're not getting the product and the service. So that's when most of the actions take place.
I think those are really good points. Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, I was just going to add, yeah, I think Sylvia's right in that I don't know offhand the percentage, but a lot of the complaints that we see, it is sort of, I guess to summarize it, as a contractual dispute. Did the architect follow all the requirements of the written contract? And so did they meet the requirements of the written contract? And then did they fulfill all of what they were supposed to under the contract? So some of those, it can start as a sort of a he said, she said, but staff spend the time investigating, reviewing the contract, reviewing all the related documents to determine, who was at fault.
It's interesting. I always make the distinction that there are two parallel lanes as practitioners. There's the practice of architecture and there's the business of architecture. I think oftentimes practitioners get so involved in the design of into the practice of architecture, which is design, development, and construction documentation and construction administration, the process. But there's also a business component or contractual component that's required of them that's oftentimes ignored. And that's why I've been such a big advocate of finding some way of tying continuing education to professional practices so that to better educate architects as to what their professional or business requirements are of them. So I think that this is a good one. So are there any other comments about objective number 1?
Yeah, I think that since the bulk of the board's actions don't actually come to the board for a decision, but as Laura said, are made before us, it would still be helpful, I think, under this bullet point to get some information, those descriptions. One might be, were there any mitigating factors in both the action of the architect or the decision by the staff in terms of its remedy or sanction? Also, as Sylvia mentioned, it might be good to mention the source of the complaint. Did our staff find it out, or was it from a consumer, et cetera, et cetera? And the last thing is, just so we can get more background on our penalties, and we have one bullet point about thresholds, instead of saying the fine was 1,500, could it have been 5,000 or 0? Maybe something that gives us a range of dimensions that shows that indeed it wasn't the maximum, and then we can kind of look at that and say, how come it wasn't? And that will give us a little more feedback to staff and vice versa.
Yeah, and that's why, Robert, I actually tied objectives 1 and objectives 5 in some ways, tied those together because I think one basically supports the other, or it's tied in some ways to the other in the outcomes anyway. Any other comments? So, Laura, is the task clear here, what we're asking for staff?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Let's go to objective number 2, please.
If I could jump in,
yes, please,
Chair. The Act actually specifies 3 different levels of violations and fee amount. So there are limits in terms of in terms of regulation, what the maximum amount can be for a given class of violation.
Excellent. And Bob, since you have that in front of you, can you give me that chapter and verse, please?
Sure. It's in the California Code of Regulations, section 152, citations, and then C under that where it defines the 3 types: Class A, Class B, and Class C.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Very helpful. And Laura, I think, in some ways, there's a lot to digest on this board. And that's where, again, I mentioned that I think Bob's presence here is invaluable because he lives in this space on a regular basis. And so this is like a fire hose, quite honestly, coming in. So this is my second year. So absorbing this information and understanding and being able to filter it and use it in an effective way or in an informed way will take a bit of time. But I appreciate that, Robert. Thank you very much. The second one basically talks about, this is more about education. Again, I go now, the narrative and discussions about common violations. What I'd like to find out here, from my perspective, is that what are the most common violations, both of, I think the unlicensed individual is easy because they're practicing under the guise of as an architect, and they're not. But as a violation for practitioners, what are the most common? So I would be looking for three things: the most common violations, the sort of product demographics, meaning type of construction, occupancy. Is it R3 occupancy versus, you know, education versus assembly? Is it commercial versus residential? So I like to basically better understand that to see if we should be creating a targeted campaign to reach certain, in particular, types of practitioners. I think would be helpful as well. I'm of the opinion that education should be happening on both fronts, as I said earlier, both to the consumer and to the practitioner. And so to better understand that and to accept our responsibility to serve, because in educating the practitioner, we are protecting the public interest. And so that's kind of my way of thinking about this. So I'll open it up for comments and discussion.
If I could offer some thoughts on what I've seen over the 5 years here, I think, certainly I believe, and Laura could confirm this, that contract violations, I believe, are probably the most prominent, the highest number. That said, I think one of the key factors behind that, and behind everything that's happening here, is communication, or rather the lack of communication between the architect and the client. And that's the basis for so many misunderstandings, which lead to so many issues, either to us or legally. So, I think the more we can reinforce that with our licensees, for sure, to be sure to communicate, ongoing, thoroughly with your client, so that you minimize the understandings that can come up.
Yeah, great point. Sylvia, you're muted.
The other thing that I've noticed is sort of broken promises. And when they become really dire, that's when I think the complaints happen. I mean, we've all, as practitioners, we've all missed deadlines. You don't get taken to court or to the architect's board for punishment because you missed a few deadlines. But these are egregious egregious acts of not meeting their contractual obligations. So I just don't know. To me, that's just like you said, it's sort of like just being a bad practitioner. You're not a bad designer or whatever, but you're a bad practitioner because you can't even meet your obligations. So it's to your point, I think it was your point, Ron, that you said it's communication, because all that architect had to do was to inform the owner, like, I told you I was going to, and this happens quite a bit. I told you I was going to submit to the building department February of 2020, and it does not look like I'm going to be able to submit on February 2020. I'm going to submit in June of 2020. And the client would say yes or no, or you're fired or whatever. But most of the time, the architect does not even tell them the update. And so February passes, and then, all the way till June or July. And that's when the client becomes very, very angry, and their whole schedule is blown, and you've not told them. So that's just informing and changing the contractual obligations so that everybody's on the same page. That's pretty easy, I would think.
I would also add, perhaps as part of our outreach to our licensees, to be careful in inserting time commitments and deadlines in your contracts. There are too many, I just saw one fairly recently, there are too many outside influences, other agencies, departments, coastal, things that come up within that window that you've committed to a client. They're beyond your control, but if you hadn't put that date in writing, you'd have more flexibility. So, I would say first, don't commit unless you absolutely need to or you're asked to, and then follow up with Sylvia by all means of communicating throughout the process.
Yeah. One thing that's a smart thing to do, I've noticed, is instead of putting real dates, you put in slots of time. 3 months for this, 4 months for that. And that way you're not obligating yourself to real time, and that way you can discuss those dates with the client in a more rational way. So, yeah.
It's interesting. One of the things that we say all the time in my firm is basically manage expectations, and never let the client seek information before you provide it. And so we basically have a requirement that there are weekly summary reports that are issued to the client. But see, that's the business of architecture. And that's where I think there's flaws, is that we're trained to be creative minds and creative energies, not necessarily how to run businesses. And I think that's where the flaws happen in these scenarios, is that people think, oftentimes architects have been described as glorified artists. So it's that creative energy that people are hiring, but they recognize that there's a huge investment when they hire an architect, and they're investing a lot of time and money. And so obviously there's anxiety and expectations that's tied to that. And knowledge is power. As a consumer, you want to be informed so that you basically don't think that you're flushing money down the toilet here. And so I think part of it is really being conscious and being emphatic about what we have to do as licensees, and what we are obligated to provide the client in terms of information. So I agree with that 100%.
How are we going to put that information out there so that it'd be useful?
Yeah, so one of the things that I talked with Laura about is what are the mechanisms. We talked about printed documentation. We talked about probably doing some small video vignettes that we could basically post. I did take the liberty of over the last few weeks going on DCA's website and just looking at videos. And so I think they do a pretty decent job. I mean, certain things can be done a bit more polished, but content's there, not necessarily about just for architecture, but this content in terms of how they approach it. So I think how we communicate these things, both in print medium as well as digital medium, I think will be really helpful.
Is there something in the architect community, you've talked about education around and the kind of practicalities of the business of architect, particularly if there are small shops who are getting into trouble from that aspect? What kind of continuing education course exists for the practicalities? Is there a way, like with the score for small businesses, is there like some volunteer senior architect types that would sort of counsel someone who gets into a business trouble, that we can, as part of our discipline, refer them to that person or pool to really get some hands-on practical advice on how to run the business side? It's beyond maybe our ability to do that, but maybe work with AI, et cetera. We could find that kind of a program set up to give that kind of practical advice to people who get in that kind of trouble.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't think that there is a body that's, let me just kind of say it this way. I think both the AIA and there's other organizations that have done a really good job in publishing manuals and guide and literature on professional practices. There are probably that I can think of about a dozen books that I've basically looked at on professional practices. So I think the material is out there. There is no continuing education, but there actually, as I said before, I think that there are videos, but you have to seek it out. You have to be looking for it. And I think that one of the things, I know there are occasions, and Laura, you correct me if I'm wrong, where part of the penalty for violation is education. And so maybe that's part of what we do. That can be part of that platform, is requiring once we identify that coursework, that we can direct violators to those areas where they basically find themselves lacking knowledge.
Is there such a thing, Laura, that we do now?
I don't think that we formally require anyone to complete education, and we have our enforcement analyst on the line, so if anyone would like to chime in, they can speak up as well. But that's definitely something we can explore as to whether it's formal or more informal in terms of providing them resources that would help them. I think that's a good suggestion.
Ron, I think it's within our purview to create some of these resources for people before they, get in trouble, So I think it is within our purview. Laura could disagree, or whether we have the ability to do so, but it seems to me like if it's on our website and it's a video or something like that, or a set of instructions, much like we have to take all the various seminars these days for to keep in practice, and also to just basically keep our role on the board. Okay. It could be a seminar or a video that says, hey, here's do's and don'ts. If you want to stay out of trouble. See, no one, in my opinion, except us, has that responsibility, because we're the final arbiter of whether you've done something wrong or not. So it seems to me that we could do something proactively before people get into trouble. A lot of times they just are terrible communicators, or they forget about their contracts, things like that. So why don't we just inform them via some kind of campaign?
I think that would be great. One of the other things that I had talked about with Laura, so Laura and I had that conversation, Sylvia, and I think she believes that DCA is the proper avenue for developing that material. Is that correct, Laura?
Yep, I agree.
Yes, they can definitely assist us, and you're right, Sylvia. This is certainly something that the board can do.
Correct.
And lastly, I think that in this regard, one of the things that, and this now goes back to communication, and I sat in on the communications committee meeting an hour ago, and one of the things that Mitra talked about is basically really working with colleges and universities. And one of the things that I failed to do, and I've looked, at least I haven't looked at all of California schools, but the whole idea of professional practice coursework. Are there courses on professional practices? And so oftentimes the only engagement of professional practice are those limited questions on the examinations. And then what ends up happening is that these practitioners, even when they're licensed, go to work for large organizations, and they never really get into the business of practicing architecture. The practice of the business of architecture is just on the design construction side of the architecture. So I think part of it is trying to figure out, to your point, Sylvia, is that what are the vehicles that we can use to communicate and to educate? We talked about print media, and we talked about video vignettes, and maybe education, meaning through the academia is another lane that we should start to advocate and encourage. So I think that this is a good one. So I appreciate this. And Laura, so again, the takeaway here from my perspective is to identify the most common violations, particularly in areas of practice. I think would also be interesting to know, and the range of violations in each of those categories. And I'll rely on staff to basically tell us what data do they think in terms of its broad application would be most useful in our assessment. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Alicia has her hand up.
I'm sorry, I wasn't even looking at that. Please, Alicia.
No worries. So we also have a couple different handbooks that the board has published over the years. One of them is the Architect Licensure Handbook, and maybe we can add like a section in there about what they can do to, what are some of the common violations and what they can do to prevent or stay in compliance, I guess, is my thought.
Yeah, and one of the things that this is a question, Laura, is it conceivable that somewhere in the renewal process that, and maybe it's not required, but and maybe ultimately it is, but is there somewhere in the renewal process where a licensee can acknowledge certain things? For example, that you've submitted your birth forms, that you've basically read this document. Is there any way for us to find a way of, because again, as I said before coming to the board, I never even heard of the birth form. And so is there a way for us to put these things front and center?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely publicize them during the renewal process. The extent to which we can have them kind of attest that they've completed it, that I'm not positive on, but we'd be happy to do a little bit of research on that and see what's doable and kind of report back to you as to what we can and can't do, and take it from there.
Because I think part of what would be interesting, and I read something in the, I'm going to look at this real quick if you guys will indulge me. But I thought I saw something, where was that? I think it talked about the fact that there's 21,000, nearly 22,000 licensees, and only 15,000 of those basically submitted their birth forms. And so the question then becomes, when I submit my renewal, is that the appropriate time for staff to confirm that I've also, because you acknowledge the renewal payment and application, but is that a good time to basically also confirm that I've submitted my birth?
It would seem like it'd be a good opportunity or a good time to remind the licensee that they either have a birth on file or they don't. They need to have one and sort of confirm what they have one way or the other. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. We don't do that now.
And so, and again, and I'm not suggesting, and maybe the birth form is at least of our concerns, right? But it basically at least start to say to licensees that, there are requirements that you have to fulfill. And if you don't know them, here they are. And it says sometimes not necessarily requiring it, but making sure that they're aware of it, maybe a good first step.
There's another potential mechanism. Maybe during the CSE exam, some of these business issues are added. Now, this is a whole can of worms, I understand, but we have all these volunteers that write questions, and CSE is under our control, not NCARB's, correct? Is it 100% under our control? Okay, perfect. I think that we might want to consider questions like, are you familiar with the Architect's Handbook? Have you read through it? And here's a few questions or something like that.
Yeah.
That would work.
That would be a good one.
Mhm.
And so, Laura, if it's appropriate, I'm happy to basically work with staff. And I forgot the body that basically drafts the questions. I forgot the official title for that group. But I'd be happy to kind of at least, because I know that questions are kind of categorized, and I forgot. Again, it's been years since I took the architectural exam, so I'm not quite sure what category, if there's a professional practice category anymore, that we can basically work with them to identify and talk about.
Yeah, it's a good question, a good point, Sylvia. I don't know what we do have on the supplemental exam in terms of professional practice, if we have anything at all. So that is actually more in the licensing side. So we'd be happy to kind of check on that and report back to you, Ron, and staff can work with you to see what isn't there, and where we can go with this idea. It's a good one to look at.
Yeah, that would be helpful. That's fantastic. Okay, again, I want to be mindful of time, and I apologize. Laura and Tian told me that they had slated an hour for each of these, so I'm trying to rifle through them as best I can, but I can see that I'm a little late, so please bear with me. But my mother used to always say clarity and brevity. I've always lacked brevity, so so bear with me. So let's go on to objective 3, if you guys don't mind. So again, this isn't really the same thing, right? So we talked about the renewal process. That's why I basically said 2, 3, and 4 to me, we can kind of aggregate to some extent, because it's really about educating more than anything else. So are there particular issues here that you guys think we should discuss further? Hearing none and seeing none, let's go to number 4. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I think we've touched on this in our previous discussion, Ron.
Okay, thank you. So this one is, again, I've said this to you guys a tons of time. I am a residential design professional, so most of what we design are houses more than anything else. And so, and contracts are always a big deal. And the easiest contracts in the world to sign, again, we've been fortunate in the custom homes we design, those are the easiest ones. It's the ones that are when you're working for other parties that, for me, as I've grown to better understand some of the challenges that consumers are confronted with, that bothers me the most. And it doesn't bother me as a practitioner, but I acknowledge the fact that there's there's always an in-between. There's oftentimes an in-between between us and the consumer as a practitioner. And from my perspective, understanding where our responsibility is to the consumer when that gap exists, and what is the consumer's rights when that gap exists. And because I mentioned before, oftentimes if I'm working for a large developer, if I'm basically doing a spec house or something like that, there's no relationship between me and the consumer. And the consumer in that scenario is really the builder or the contractor. And so the question for me is that how do we better address, and maybe this is a non-issue. That's why I go back to the question of violations and the type of common violations. And is this even an issue? So I open that back up to the floor for discussion.
Well, I think it has come up, a number of times around the scenario you just described, where an architect is working for a developer, a builder, who is providing houses for clients. Typically, there's no direct connection between the architect and the consumer that buys that residence, and the law doesn't require that connection or that communication. Whether that's unfortunate or not, but that. The role of the architect is directly related to the developer, because law states that the architect must have a contract with the client. And in those cases, the client is the developer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
we've seen cases where it's difficult to tie in a consumer. They're frustrated, and I think we understand it at times, but legally there's no direct connection for them.
And in that regard, for example, there are two types of documents, and again, I'm leaning on my personal experience here, being really transparent. There are two types of documents that we provide to our clients. One is what we refer to as a builder set of documents, which are those things that really focus on life safety, what we call liability exposure type issues, and things of that nature. And then obviously the architecture. Then there's full service documents, where you basically are carrying things soup to nuts. And so in that regard, the question becomes consumer rights and consumer expectations, and how those documents, how the limits of those documents, because again, you can get a building permit with very minimal documents, as we all know as a practitioner, but architects basically, depending on how they practice, are really committed to the outcome. And so a lot more product and a lot more information is provided to ensure that the product performs well under duress, that we basically make sure that the general contractor has enough information to protect the public. But the ultimate question is what's required in those documents. And so, because then again, I go back to the whole idea of the rights and roles of the consumer and the contracts.
To me, that's part of the same thing we've been talking about. It's putting everything that they need to know to practice correctly. And like we were saying, it can be for both the public and the architect. Here's what your relationship means. Here's what your contract means. Maybe we can do it that way, because since we're obligated to protect the public's HSW, why don't we put them into the audience as well? Is that okay too, Laura? Yes. Okay. Why don't we do that so that it's sort of an interaction or interactive relationship between the owner and the architect? Helps everybody. It'll be interesting. I hope we have a budget for this, because it could be really, really interesting to be able, and we have in-house people that can create videos and whatnot. So if they can do something, now they should be better than the ones where they're still wearing their 1980s business outfits, the ones that we have to sit through every year.
Yes.
They're still wearing 1980 power suits, man. And
DTA has some great staff
yeah,
for that.
yeah. Let's do something a little more updated.
And I think there's enough data and case studies before us to basically, that's where you go back to the common things. And these video vignettes, basically, maybe they're taking a few of these cases that are the most common and say, okay, let's talk about how it should have happened, how the relationship should have been developed.
Right.
Let's talk about what they didn't do that they should have done.
Right.
I think that those are good opportunities, I believe, to basically do good work.
Yep. Good idea. Have someone play the role of the owner, someone play the role of the architect, and then have that interaction, portrayed.
And that's where the investigative team, I think, becomes really, really helpful with staff. Is that what's been impressive to me is the breadth and depth of the investigations as I read through these materials. It's not as if these guys do this with one eye closed. They're really engaged, and I appreciate that. But I think there's a lot to learn because as I read through these, as you said, Sylvia, sometimes it's just a blatant disregard for responsibilities. And I think that that's really helpful to really partner with the investigative team to basically help us to build the proper narrative around these videos.
Yeah,
So,
yep. Oh.
Go ahead, no, please.
Back to the comment you had, the scenario around where you described where a architect is working for a developer and not directly for the consumer, therefore their obligation is to the developer. There are some sections in the code, in the act, that actually allow a direct connection, and the architect is, for instance, required to meet all applicable codes, regulations, and I forget what the other word. That does not limited between the client and the architect. That can be a violation of that can be filed by anybody. So if a consumer does have a house, they found some things that they feel the architect was negligent in, they could certainly file that a claim for that, a complaint to us.
Yeah, it's interesting, Bob. One of the things that is not uncommon when you're doing large subdivisions is for a homeowner to come back to the architect because our documents are recorded with the city, is to come to us and ask us for copies of the plans.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, we will basically say to them that we would need to be authorized by the client to release those documents. And it's not uncommon for clients to support release of documents, but it's details and construction details usually they don't want. And oftentimes, as you know, there's value engineering that happens in development all the time. And so the fear is that we've taken this out and it shows it in the documents. And so you often have those scenarios. So the consumer oftentimes will never really see the finished document. They may get a marketing package that the developer puts together. But that's kind of how the industry works.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was a good one. Again, Laura, I think we have enough direction on this one. Is that correct? Okay, let's move on. So then this one, I think, as I mentioned before, ties to one, which is basically the cases and the enforcement of those cases. So unless there's some additional comments here, I think we can move past this one as well.
Mhm.
No objection. Okay, let's go forward. This last one is basically the monitoring and proactive enforcement of unlicensed advertising. And Laura and I talked about how this happens. Obviously, as you guys in academia, there are, and I'm not sure how it works, but they seem to be fairly effective for the most part. There's software that combs through a paper and cross checks it against public documents and recorded documents for plagiarism. So it seems as though there's a way of doing this mass search, and I'm not quite sure how it works. But one of the things we were talking about is what's the bandwidth what's required in order to accomplish this task, because it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, and so the idea that you're just going to just type in architect and then every time, again, maybe that's how it works. You just type, do a Google search and type in architect and see if anybody pops up and then see if they're licensed. And so that's the part that I think is a bit more challenging here. And so I'm interested to get your thoughts.
Right. Well, Laura, as you are well aware, we have seen cases like this where it was found on social media that someone had advertised as an architect and they were not licensed. So how have we found those cases in the past, Laura?
They're usually I would say they're either consumer complaints where we've gotten it, or that staff has noticed it either like through maybe like an article in a newspaper, or found it somehow on their own. But I wouldn't say that we spend a significant amount of time looking for it. It just happens to come to their attention.
So Ron, are you saying that maybe we need to be a little more proactive in this arena?
Well, I think one of the comments that we got from the survey from both industry people and consumers was that there was not enough meat behind this effort to basically really manage the practice of unlicensed individuals or the actions of unlicensed individuals. And there's not enough teeth in the enforcement of doing this. And I'm not quite sure what the enforcement mechanism should look like going forward. But I think first is basically saying whether or not it's an issue and how big of an issue is it. I suspect, and I can't remember what the number was, of those violations that come before us, they come before staff, how many of them, what percentage of them are for unlicensed individuals? Do you have a sense of that, Laura? I thought I had a number in front of me, but I can't put my finger on it.
I don't know that offhand, but maybe Alicia might be able to chime in with that.
And it could be approximate. Is it a third? Is it 10%?
Hi, Ron. This is Alicia. I'm not sure what that percentage is, but Steph and I can look that up. One of the other things that I wanted to point out was sometimes we also receive complaints about unlicensed individuals from other architects. So they may have come across another architect or an unlicensed person advertising, or I think we've seen where there's been like a business card somewhere at another location and an architect finds it and looks them up. So those are some of the other ways that we also find unlicensed individuals where they're advertising on social media. I don't know that we have the manpower to kind of look through the internet for unlicensed practice, which is why one of the things that we're working on right now is the regulation for having licensed architects have their license number on any advertisement. So it's easier for us to determine at a quick glance who's licensed and who's not.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a whole different conversation. And thank you, Alicia. I appreciate that. One of the things, again, I look back at last year's conversations in the minutes, and one of the things they talked about is fraudulent use of numbers. And so an individual can basically put a number up on the screen on their website or even on their business card. And unless they're challenged, with a complaint, nobody's going to ever really look up that number, right? So particularly if they do good work. And so it's almost like someone basically taking a license plate off another car and putting it on their car. The cops see that it, or the law enforcement sees it as a registered vehicle with a registered plate. They have no reason to question whether or not it's on the right car. So that's the challenge with that application. One of the things that I found interesting in the package that was sent out was the building officials information guide. And I found it striking that the building officials are encouraged to report unlicensees as well.
Yes.
And so I thought that was good. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can identify these violations. We have to basically continue to advocate all those processes and all those vehicles. Someone called me about 2 months ago about this. This is a statement, and I'm curious to get everybody's feedback on this. Somebody called me and basically told me about this individual that was published in a local magazine, and they were a really great architect. So I looked them up and kind of walked through this, and the person who wrote the article was really flattering. But I looked up this person's name in the California registry, and they were not licensed. And so the question becomes, as a writer, a journalist, are you obligated to confirm that the person you're calling an architect is truly an architect? And then now again, I'll look to me. So now, and then when I read this, I'm like, okay, so now do I call the state and say, okay, this person wrote this article about this person that wasn't a licensed architect? So it's things like that we basically figure, well, what are the stopgaps? What do we use to monitor this, and what are our own individual obligations to this? I oftentimes hear architects say, well, this person in my office is a really, really talented person, as good as any architect that I've met. And oftentimes they'll refer to them as architects. And so it's things like that that I just think that we have to be careful about. So again, I'll open it for comment.
Wow.
In my days of private practice, I would occasionally see someone and hear about someone a writer indicating a person is an architect. I would usually or oftentimes contact the writer and say, just in the future, please be aware you should check this as you're going forward. And I would also often contact the editor of that publication and let them know as well practice. So hopefully try to cut it off at the pass.
Great idea.
You put a bunch of stuff in that statement, Ron. Jeez.
There's just a lot there.
Yeah, you just packed a whole bunch of stuff. Bob, you addressed part of it, but I would have to say that what you described is so prevalent that the writers and the editors don't check because they have no idea what the difference is between a licensed architect and an unlicensed architect.
Right.
So it is up to them, but they're not even knowledgeable about the need. They're not aware of the need to even do this. If someone says they're an architect, they're an architect.
Yeah.
Why would you question it? So I don't know. I don't know. The situation has, it requires some sort of containment, but sometimes I feel like the horse has left the barn in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And to make what you started even more complicated, there are now actually states with legislators that are very interested in deregulating our practice, as well as the practice of other professionals. And so we're fighting that as well. So it's on many fronts that we're dealing with the situation. And I don't know where we can begin. I mean, obviously, Laura, you probably don't know the percentage, but I'm guessing we're probably only getting a little bit of the tip of the iceberg on all the stuff that goes on right under our nose, just simply because we have no way of catching everybody. Do you think I'm right about that, or do you think I'm exaggerating, Laura? Oh,
You're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I think you're right about that, Sylvia. I don't know offhand the percentage, but I think if you look at the number of licensees we have versus the number of complaints we get, obviously, it's a very small number, and the number of licensees against whom a complaint's been filed, it's really small. So it doesn't mean necessarily that there's a lot more out there that we don't know about, but it seems likely that there's.
Yeah, there's probably more than we know about, but we don't know how much more than.
Right.
And so, Laura, I think if I could basically talk about what staff could do for us here, is that if we could identify current processes for monitoring, and what I started with is that if you told me that, and again, I have this information somewhere, I just wasn't able to put my fingers on it before this call, but if you told me that unlicensed individuals represented less than 1% of the violations that come before this body, I would think that it's really not worth a lot of investment to solve it. And I think Alicia mentioned earlier is that trying to monitor this thing on the internet it requires a lot of effort. That's just one of my clients always says, not enough squeeze in the juice, not enough juice in the squeeze. And so part of it is making sure that we're investing your energy, your staff's energy in the appropriate place. But I think starting with what we currently are doing and how we can improve those practices before maybe adding additional layers to it.
Sure, we can do that and report back to the committee. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Bob.
And then I think we can also look to see maybe what a few of the other boards might do in this area where it's probably common, since we can get some best practice ideas.
Appreciate that. I'm sorry, Bob.
Well, I was going to say, I think for staff to try to monitor social media, I mean, it's just a huge task, virtually impossible. But the other thing too is that I know it's been very frustrating for staff on the board to correct or have social media make changes. I mean, they will just arbitrarily lump architects and designers into one category on their website. We can't get them to change that. We've tried, I think, to no avail. So.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I would also continue to advocate is building partnerships, and with the likes of other industry partners, academia, associations like the AIA, NOMA, and all those other entities that we're basically working from the same sheet music. And so, in that we're sharing materials and information, even if we basically sharing the same or co-publishing some documents that can exist on multiple platforms, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think one key relationship that the board has had over the years is with the building officials throughout the state. There's a group called CALBO, which is a statewide organization of them. My former colleague Bob Carter and myself have typically attended the annual conventions, conferences for the CALBO. Laura attended one pre-pandemic, so we really, emphasize that relationship. And as a result, we do get calls and contacts and emails from building officials throughout the state when they see something that they're not sure about.
That's great.
So, Ron, just a couple of comments. One is if you
Yes,
ever can
please.
find that software you mentioned that would allow you to legitimately cull the web more easily, that would be great. And then once we have in place the implementation of our new rules about advertising everywhere, including the web presence, then we can kind of tweak our information to consumers to say, if you see someone saying an architect on the web, look for a license number. If you find a license number, check it against our site. And if the answer comes up no on either one, you should let us know about it. I have to go because I got a 1:30 court hearing to do, Ron, okay? So I'll have to drop
I
off
appreciate
now.
your time, Bob. We're about to wrap this up. I think I only had one of the things that I was supposed to address on the agenda. Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Sure.
Are there any other questions or comments on this subject?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see here. Go back to my
Ron, this is Laura. So I think that covered all the objectives. The one other item on this agenda was the building official guide, the review of the guide. And for this one, we had a request from AIA California to include some additional information. So if you'd like, we have members of AIA California as attendees that could kind of just describe briefly what it is they're looking for and the change they'd like to make. And that way the committee can decide if it's something they're interested in.
Yeah, please. And whoever that is, Gloria, if you can identify them. But let me first say that I actually read through this, and I'm assuming this is their draft. This is a 2021 edition of this, but I actually thought it was quite good and quite informative. So I appreciate the opportunity to engage the conversation. So please identify the speaker.
Okay, so I think we probably will need to go to public comment for that to happen.
Okay, let's moderator, if you could do that for me.
We have Carrie Bernstein from AIA California and Mark Paone, I believe. Not sure if both or one of them wants to take the lead on the comments.
Moderator still with us?
This is the moderator. Mark has been sent a request to unmute his microphone, and he has remuted himself. Hold on just a moment. Let's try Carrie next.
Hi, it's Carrie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm sure. I know Mark has a lot to say, and everything you've said about unlicensed individuals just got so close to the letter that AIA has submitted. So our letter it was very interesting to hear about all the types of violations. The letter and our request is focused on unlicensed individuals, and that clearly correlating BPC 5538 with the current standards of the California Building Code, Chapter 1613. And the gist of it is that the non-licensed individuals are not permitted to furnish or design. There's a couple of different words used in 5537 and 5538, plans for alterations or structures that, renovations and other structures that require certain types of engineering beyond conventional wood frame. And this aspect of non-seismic and non-structural is typically referred to the primary structure of the building, but the building codes have been updated to include
secondary and tertiary aspects of the building, including things that are fixed to the building, such as parts of an interior, and also storefronts. So for example, the example given was suspended ceilings in commercial spaces. Suspended ceilings in commercial spaces require seismic attachments. And when you look at the kinds of things that require seismic bracing, seismic attachments, it's a whole lot of the interior. There are very few things left that don't require some kind of seismic bracing or has to address seismic loads. So the gist of the letter is to say, when you look at that, and when you look at those two things in combination, informing the public and updating the CAB Building Officials Guide to underscore that they must be looking at these other aspects of the building code, not just the primary structure aspects, that would help with unlicensed individuals pursuing work and even the ability to obtain building permits for work that they're not licensed to do. That's the gist of the letter.
Carrie, if I could interject, so what we're asking CAB to do is connect the dots between the Building and Professions Code and the California Building Code as it pertains to work by non-licensed individuals. You know, we believe 5538 was written wisely as it focuses on seismic forces, and it does not define what building elements experience those forces. That's what the building code does, and the building code is constantly updated in that regard. You know, for example, every time there's an earthquake, we learn something, and that frequently results in expanded seismic requirements. Examples of that, the big impact ones were the Loma Prieta earthquake, Northridge and Whittier earthquakes in the late 80s and 90s. The building code responded to those earthquakes with an expansion of what building elements experience seismic forces. If you compare 5538 with CBC section 1613.1, they use very similar, almost identical language when referring to non-structural elements of buildings. Non-structural elements of buildings are, when that's, the term non-structural means not primary structure. So it's everything else, interior walls, ceilings, as Carrie mentioned, frequently referred to as TIs. But now those elements are required to resist seismic forces, making them ineligible for the non-seismic exemption in 5538. Now, when 5538 was last updated in 1991 or 90, I believe, the code didn't say that. That was a change in code. And what we would like CAB to do is in their instructions to building officials in their information guide, wherever section 5538 is referenced in that guide, we'd like you to add something to the effect of quote, CBC section 16.13.1 specifies what building elements do and do not experience seismic forces. We think in doing that, you know, you'll be curtailing work by non-licensed individuals when it's being allowed by building officials who think it's allowed because they're misinterpreting the codes or not connecting the dots. And I think this would go a long way to curtailing work by non-licensed individuals. So thank you for considering the request, and Carrie and I are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mark and Carrie.
Ron, I have a question.
Please.
Yeah. So the way that I understand the code about, you know, unlicensed practitioners being able to design, what I understand is very rudimentary in terms, I mean, not rudimentary, but basic. Like, for example, it can be up to 2 stories, it can be up to X number of units, and obviously single family homes are exempt from license. So that's the way I understand it. So what you're doing, I think, is you're putting a layer of more sort of restriction, if you will, and understanding. But does single family homes and two-story buildings not require seismic? They do.
Right.
So
So I think we're talking, Sylvia, about two different statutes.
okay.
The residential statute is 5537. I
Right.
call it the residential, but that's
Yeah.
the one where the language you're quoting is.
Right.
5538 is the section that we're talking about.
Uh-huh.
And it says, let me get to my quote. It says non-licensed individuals may not design any portions of a building if those elements experience seismic forces. It goes on to say, including non-structural elements and their supports that are permanently attached to structures. Now you look at that, and I'll say, here's what 1613.1 says in CBC, and I quote, every structure and portion thereof, including non-structural components that are permanently attached to the structures, that should sound familiar, and their supports and attachments shall be designed and constructed to resist the effects of earthquake motion. So the statute says non-licensed individuals may not design seismic forces, including non-structural elements, and the building code says every structure, including non-structural components, experience seismic loads. So I think just it's really clear, and it's clear to me because I've studied this for a long time, and so that makes it easier. But I think it's really clear that these two go hand in hand. The statute wasn't intended to define what building elements experience seismic forces. And that's going to change every time the code changes.
Wow. I did not know that. I think you're right. I don't think building officials.
Yeah, many of them don't. Some of them do. Some, like, for example, in the tenant improvements in a high rise, if you have done any of this work, as you go up the building, the height above the ground level is part of the calculation on forces. And so I recently just did it for a 6-story building, and the forces that we encountered on the first and second floor were less than on the third and fourth, less than on the 5 and 6. And at each one of those steps, we had to increase the size and frequency of anchors. So we have non-licensed individuals using standard details for likely developed for ground level, then now applying them to high-rise situations. And so it's clearly not something that they should be doing. And so some of the reason for the example is that it's my understanding some of the larger cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco have really restricted work done by non-licensed individuals in those situations, because they are making that connection. But most building departments aren't going to be sophisticated enough, and no disrespect to them. I live in a small little town, and our building department consists of a building inspector who works 2.5 days a week. And so I think if you guys can clarify the instruction to building officials, and wherever 5538 is mentioned, and I think it's mentioned in 12 locations, that we really clarify what can be done and cannot be done. So thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess I have a question for staff and for Bob. So And first, let me say, Mark and to Carrie, is that I think that the ask is more than reasonable, quite honestly. But having said that, I'm curious to better understand two things from the from the regulation and enforcement side. Um, is commercial applications that are being presented here, is that a large portion? That's why I go back to the, you know, what specific areas are these violations occurring in? And so, of unlicensed individuals, is commercial applications that Mark and Carrie are describing here, is that a common violation that's come before us? And then the second question is that what is the level of engagement with Calvo? I mean, how I think Bob mentioned, you know, regional conventions. One of the things that I advocate all the time is that architects join these building official networks so that we can better engage one another in these conversations. But I'll defer, or I'll open it and look for comments from both Bob and from staff on this.
Yeah, I'll be glad to jump in, Ron. I think, you know, the difference, the building code, our regulations, our section 553 is statute. So statutes, you know, much more difficult to change and update. Not that it shouldn't or couldn't be. I think in the messaging we put out to the building officials, we need to be consistent with what is in the act and what is in statute. So I think right now we are. I think, you know, and I understand where Mark and Carrie are coming from. I would think the more likely responsible way to do it would be to go to Calvo and to approach the building officials and make sure, as you say, some of them are aware of it. Certainly the bigger cities, I think, are. But the bigger cities are also where you're likely to find the high rise in the larger buildings. The small towns, you're not going to get a 6, 8, 20-story building, very likely. But I think the building officials are probably the more likely, you know, focus group to get the message out to and meet with. I know the AIA, I believe, is always at. I think Mark Christian is typically at the Calvo conferences in the past. I mean, nothing's happened in the last couple of years, so they could be a good vehicle for, again, reaching out and communicating this message to the building officials. But I think until we change our statute, we need to be consistent, I think, in our messaging from the building officials guide back to our statute and the act.
Bob, may I respond to that?
Sure.
We have had discussions with Calvo, one of the presidents a few years back, who was fully in support of our position, but wanted CAB to be clearer in their position. And throughout that instruction to building officials, if you look at 5538, where those 12 locations where it's referenced, and pair it with the building code on what is seismic and what is non-seismic, you get something very different in some cases. And what I was told on a couple of occasions is that Calvo's looking to CAB to clarify that language because they're expecting a lot of pushback from their members who, for whatever, from some members who, for whatever reason, aren't making that connection.
So Laura, if you wouldn't mind if I just jump in for a second. So this is the first that I'm aware that Cal was asking something from the board. So this might just be something that maybe it needs to become a bigger conversation, or maybe that staff needs to work on a little bit and report back to REC as to what maybe needs to take place.
I agree.
It's maybe a little bit more than I anticipated.
Exactly.
Yeah, Laura, that was an informal discussion item. It wasn't a formal request from Calvo. But that's just what I wanted to convey. I think they're on board, but they don't like. Bob feels like maybe this should be Calvo taking this position. Calvo reads the building officials' information guide, and they think, well, CAB should take the lead on this. So yeah, we're happy to meet collectively with Calbo and CAB staff and try to move this forward. But we'd like to do it quickly. There's other things in in listening to your meeting that we can also help with, and we'll be following up with Laura on that soon. So, and anything else I can answer for anyone?
Well, when you brought all this up, first of all, I was not aware. Okay, so
yeah,
I even as a practicing architect, I didn't know this. I just, I sign and stamp everything, even including a one-story, house and things like that. So it doesn't bother me, but I didn't know that this was an issue. And then the second thing that it brought to my mind, and I do not want any discussion on this, I'm just bringing it up for future, and that is, don't even get started on what this means for the interior design profession. I mean, this is going to be very different.
It is.
We aren't focused on them. We're really worried about the safety of folks. You get design build contractors doing a lot of this work, even in high rises, and it's really ripe for a problem. Yeah. And we look at those 3 big earthquakes, and the amount of interior damage caused was considerable, oftentimes far exceeding. Well, I had one client, O'Connor Hospital, they didn't have any primary structure damage. They had the equivalent in today's dollars of 1/10 of the value of the building in interior damage.
Wow.
That's like $150 million of interior damage to one hospital. So
I think that the important thing here, I think that what I'm hearing is finding some synergies between the code enforcement community and design community, and I think that's a good idea.
And if I may ask, Carrie has had her hand up and wanted to address.
I want to basically first go to again to the moderator. I see Rona Rothenberg's hand is up as well, so I'll defer to you in terms of priorities.
Rona.
Priorities are determined by you. We can get Rona next.
I think Rona put her hand down. I think Carrie's hand is still up, so we can go to Carrie unless Rona has a.
I've been able to unmute. I just want to add, Mark has talked a lot about commercial TIs. My practice and experiences on smaller scale buildings, including residential and small commercial. The implications for these buildings are equal with our request, and especially in unreinforced masonry buildings, because the building code has allowed this bolts plus, hodgepodge of seismic retrofit, where every interior finish is contributing to the seismic, at least in this particular interpretation, to the seismic strength of the building. You can't remove a piece of sheetrock without affecting the seismic capacity of the building under the bolts plus analysis. So, but in residential, especially because so many violations are occurring in the residential sphere, the same applies. And I sat, I was waiting my turn to talk with a technical services person at the building department in San Francisco, and a homeowner was ahead of me, and it took 15, 20 minutes back and forth. She didn't understand that just a closet wall might be not just a closet wall, holding up the whole building, and wasn't at all prepared. The main reason I wanted to, so I want to say that this, I don't want to dismiss this because TIs aren't factoring into your primary violations. I see a lot of this in the residential and small commercial buildings as well. In San Francisco, as with other towns, the entitlement agency is sometimes separated from the building, what we would call the building department. And I think that it'd be my interest in also referencing the entitlement agency, so that when a permit is submitted, even if it's only submitted for variance or entitlement review, there is a building design, and the person submitting that should be a licensed professional, if a licensed professional is required. So it's not only just the building officials, it just along the whole permit process we should, say building officials and entitlement agencies, so that there isn't a severing of who's designing a building strictly for the sake of an entitlement, and then all of a sudden it goes to a technical person and it's something else. I think we want to, in order to deter and in some ways cut off the non-licensed people, it has to start at the entitlement submission as well as the building submission.
Yeah, Carrie, I think you're absolutely right. We've made outreach many, many years back to planning departments throughout the state to let them know that they need to, it's not just the building department, whenever anything is submitted for planning approval, design review, entitlement, it's the responsibility of the planners to, if it's a project that requires an architect, not exempt, to confirm that in fact there is a licensed architect involved. So
yeah, I can assure you San Francisco is not doing that now, because I just reviewed some plans submitted. A neighbor called me, sort of in a panic, and they were, I looked up the person, not licensed, and it's very clear that a licensed architect was required.
Yeah.
Can we unmute Rona at this point?
Oh, thank you. I think that was a very good discussion, and thank you for letting them continue. Can you hear me, Chairman Jones?
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I had
My apologies.
thank you for the whole presentation. It's really excellent narrative and very informative. I just wanted to make a comment as an individual, not as the president of AIA California, but just speaking to the discussion that you had about items 2, 3, and 4, about case studies of common violations, about educating practitioners on standard of practice and contracts. So you shared examples, Chairman Jones, from residential practice, and I have, from my personal experience over 3.5 decades as an architect on staff in project management for public and governmental and corporate employers, I saw some patterns, for example, of common violations where in large architectural practices, which in many cases are owned, depending on the organizational structure, owned by architects and non-architects, as the owner's representative, I saw many times, almost without exception, in large practices where we were communicating with architects in the selling of the contract, but once the contract was signed, we often ended up working with unlicensed people, and it wasn't always apparent to the client. So in regard to 2, I suggest that even though you're reactive and not proactive, mostly in terms of, at least in my view, in terms of regulating the licensed practice of architecture to benefit the health, welfare, and life safety of the public, you're doing it with the individuals. But individuals who serve the clients, especially on large projects and large firms, you get all kinds of people, and it's almost the client's burden to check that. And even though it might be a matter of, you said negligence versus ignorance, right? I wrote that down. I thought that was very good, but you probably don't see too many of those complaints come in. Why? Well, we would ask them, well, I find out that how come things weren't designed right? Well, I found out that the project architect wasn't an architect, so I could invoke errors and omissions, but you never want to do that. You have to keep the projects going. So you talk to the principal and you have a, what I'll call a come to Moses, and you go back to your contract and you look at the terms, and then you switch people. You often find out to board member Juan's comment that someone's stamping the drawings, but the person hasn't been involved on a regular basis. So I would comment that, especially with my experience over many years with many practices on, several hundred major institutional projects was that it's the client's burden really, but you might not see a complaint. I could have filed complaints, but it makes too many problems. So educating large practitioners, a suggestion from Member Chase that you engage with the allied professionals. I suggest that we can engage through our large firm practices to make sure that those people who are in charge of the practice by virtue of standards of care, make sure they know what the lower levels in their firms are performing through complex contracts. My last comment pertains to Civil Code Section 2782.8A, duty to defend. So there architects, of course, work in traditional practice, and architects work for general contractors. And again, my experience in general contracting for design build is builders tend to be really good builders, really diligent about execution of the contract terms. In fact, they're better at it as a practicing team. They tended to be better at it in general than architects that I retained, and I really didn't see too many problems with large builders. But architects work on staff in a variety of capacities for planning firms, environmental consulting firms, law firms, construction management, and program management practices. Under Civil Code Section 2782.8, I actually found this out the hard way as a public sector employee, that the contract terms a few years ago were changed under a statute whereby the terms of the duty to defend of architects who are practicing professionals, architects, engineers, and surveyors, and the duty to defend limited liability by architects that work for construction managers is quite different. So I think these are areas under your strategic objectives where having case studies, finding a way to identify common violations and educating in large practices and not just small practices where architectural services are provided at a series of levels, making sure that practitioners at all levels know what those standards of practice are, and then engaging architects in government, architects in industry, architects that work in our allied professional firms in terms of both your communications effort and your regulation and enforcement effort. This would be highly beneficial to the safety of the public in terms of knowing the standards of what you sell and then implementing it through the terms of large institutional contracts, where I would venture that you're rarely going to see a complaint just because it's sort of, there's other means to resolve the issue in the benefit of health, welfare, and life safety rather than filing a complaint, because who would you file it against? The owner of the practice? You would just try to make it right in terms of your day-to-day performance. So those were my comments, and thank you again for a really informative day, and especially this discussion.
Thank you, Rona. If I could just jump in quickly, I know we're
Yes,
running out of
please,
time.
Pardon? Please.
I think what you're hitting on, Rona, is absolutely accurate. Larger firms, and it speaks to what's defined as responsible control in the Act. We know that all large firms, I've worked for a number of them in the past, the people oftentimes doing the construction documents are not licensed. They're hopefully trained, but ultimately it's that principals, whoever is going to be signing and stamping, it's their responsibility. And the way I interpret it, and I think we do here, is that that person, when they stamp and sign those drawings, they have to be familiar enough with it as if they had prepared them themselves. And be able to speak to that if they ever have to do it legally. So perhaps what we need to do is really emphasize that to address the concerns you have of larger firms. Address the issue of responsible control to principals in firms who are in fact going to be stamping and signing, and letting know the responsibility that they are assuming when they take responsible control. I think your point is very accurate, though.
Sylvia?
Can I respond to that? Thank you both, Rona and Bob, because some of you don't know this, but I just was recently selected to be on the national board of NCARB, representing our region here, Region 6. And those two issues that Rona brought up are exactly and identified by Bob are the two things that we're working on really carefully right now. This is a hot topic. One is responsible control, in which, like you said, the licensed persons in the firm, before they sign and stamp, they have to review and so forth. So there's this whole litany of sort of steps to follow before you should sign and stamp. Okay, that's number one. Number two is this, it's a subject that is near and dear to my heart, because within the large firm or even a small firm that I used to run, there were 4 to 5 people who had 20 to 30 years of experience, who were the most responsible and the most talented, experienced people, I can't call them architects, in our firm. These are practitioners that I would be able to close my eyes and just point to them and say, do a high rise, do a school, do a higher ed. They can do anything. That's how good they are, but they can't sign. They can't call themselves an architect. So just so you guys know, there is a lot of effort right now at the national level to try to figure out how do we have different steps and different mechanisms of getting people licensed that maybe can't go through the AXP and then the ARE starting when you're 23. So they've already way past that threshold. They're now in their 40s and 50s, and they're not licensed. Yet they are so competent. So we've been talking about this, just it's way too early to be able to, we have no conclusions, but just so you know, there's a lot of conversation. So Rona, I would not worry so much unless, you know, they had incompetent people within the firm doing it. But for the most part, the people who actually are project managers, you know, and project principals in some cases, they get the stuff done and they do it really well. And then somebody else has to sign it. We're going to try to see if there's a way to codify that and make a change.
Yeah. The parallel I see there, Sylvia, is perhaps in the medical profession between doctors and physician assistants. You know, a different level of physician assistants. I've had some that are probably better than doctors that I've had. So,
yeah, well, yes.
Ron, this is Laura. Sorry to interject. I think maybe we're straying a little bit from the topics.
Yeah,
that are
let's.
agenda, so I'm not
Yeah,
sure
that's
how
fine.
much more we can be.
Thank you.
Can
No,
we?
as I said, I'm going to basically ask staff to dive into this a little bit more, and as we talked about before, the synergies between the building officials and practitioners. So,
Yeah.
but again, to our guest speakers, I want to say I really appreciate the feedback, and I thought it was very, very helpful to the conversation. So, Laura, I believe that this is the last item on the agenda.
It is, yes, and staff will do that follow-up that you just asked.
If it's appropriate, do I need to basically call for a motion to adjourn, or is it because this is just a committee, I don't have to do that?
You can just adjourn the committee.
To the participants and our guests, to the committee members, to Bob, again, welcome. I appreciate your participation and look forward to working with you further. Laura, Sylvia, as always, I enjoyed the discourse between you and Robert as well. So, and Laura, to you and your staff, thank you much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
Meeting's adjourned.
Goodbye.